Welcome to Sober Sunrise, a podcast bringing you AA speaker meetings with stories of experience, strength, and hope from around the world. We bring you several new speakers weekly, so be sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help us remain self-supporting, please visit our website at sober-sunrise.com. Whether you join us in the morning or at night, there's nothing better than a sober sunrise. We hope that you enjoy today's speaker.
Hello everybody, my name's Ed Mutum and I'm an alcoholic. By the grace of God, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and sponsorship, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink or a mood-altering chemical since January 5th of 1971. And I'm really pleased about that. Yeah, I know I'm too young and too pretty to have that much time. But I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank Joanne for asking me, and I love to do retreats. And I'll tell you why I love to do retreats, because lives change at these. If you've been coming, you already know that. If you're new, you're about to experience it, and it may be your life. This is a place where God lives intensely, and I'm really grateful about that. And I'm really grateful anytime I actually don't have a retreat business. I'm a pastor, which is kind of a retreat business, I guess. But don't hold that against me. Heard my talk first. You know, it's kind of like you got to apologize for being a pastor anymore. You never hear any good jokes either. You know? No, you don't. It's like I'll be talking, I'll be at a convention or something, and I always like to go by Ed. You know, Ed's the way I got sober, and that's the way I like it. But a lot of people call me Reverend and Pastor, and I always say whatever's comfortable to you. I want you to be comfortable. And it's funny, I'll be in some place talking, and somebody will come up and say, Reverend Ed, how are you? And I'll turn back to that person, all of a sudden the conversation totally changed. Well, I go to church every Sunday, dude. Or I've been thinking about it. I say, don't get guilty on me. That's not, that's your deal. That ain't my deal. But it's really funny. It's really funny. I would have never believed that I'd be a pastor. Jeez, I'm telling you. Well, you'll know pretty quickly. And I thought what I'd do tonight is tell you my story, because one of the things that's important to me is when somebody's talking to me about the steps, and I am not an expert, I am blessed to be doing this over 35 years, and that's wonderful. But all I am is a guy who's got some experience, strength, and hope that I want to share with you. If your sponsor tells you something different, excellent, they're probably right. I'm not here to cause what a good friend of mine says, Ed, your job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I guess that's what I do. You know why? Because we're losing more people out of AA than we've ever lost before. For the first time in our history, AA's membership flatlined last year. Flatlined. There was no growth. Now, that's never happened before. And one of the reasons it's happening is we're losing people from both ends. Well, I believe we lose people when they come in to a treatment center and they're told a lot of things are AA that aren't AA, and they get into the psychology of sobriety, which is a wonderful thing. It's just not Alcoholics Anonymous. And they get that honestly confused. So one of the things I hope to do this weekend is bring some clarity into how I understand that. Not that it's right, not that it's wrong. It's certainly right for me. It's certainly right for me because my best thinking is what got me here. The finest ideas I could come up with got me to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was taken to my first AA meeting when I was 10 years old. I've got a brother in Newberry, South Carolina, sober 44 years. He's so dry we don't let people smoke around him anymore. He's like, poof, he'll go up in flames. And he took me to A&A. God, and I remember going to A&A, and there was some old guy up here, about 20, 25. My name's Fred, and I'm an alcoholic. And I thought, good for you, Fred, And I just didn't particularly care for it. Plus, they lied to me. They lied to me right off. Everybody says, I've never been lied to in AA. Well, I have. Still hear the lie. They said to me, if you keep drinking and using, you're going to die. And you know what I thought? Excellent. Where do I sign up? Because I was tired of living already. I wanted a way out. Dying didn't scare me then, but for a whole set of different reasons. It doesn't scare me today, I promise you. Just doesn't at all. Because if I've ever had a chance to go into that other place or into the other room, it's now. So I remember a few years ago, I had a heart problem. I was up in the North Woods in northern Wisconsin chopping trees, which I did every year. And for the first time, I went down with bad chest pains. Being a good alcoholic, I waited to the end of my vacation to go to the doctor. We don't want to rush into anything. And went down there, and he took me through all these tests, and he was doing all the nuclear stuff and all that. He called me into his office it was on a Monday night because I had to go in Tuesday, and he called me in and he said, Ed, he said, your heart is not in good shape. He said, you've had a massive heart attack before. And he said, the upper part of your heart isn't doing too well either. And he said, we need you in here at 5 o'clock in the morning. He said, go home and get your affairs in order. And I said, well, okay. And he said, Ed, do you get the gravity of what I'm talking? He said, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I said, Ed, I don't think you understand. He said, I need you to go home and make sure all your affairs. I said, yeah, I get it. And he said, no, I don't think I do. I said, Doc, you don't get it. You're threatening me with heaven. And he looked at me and said, well, I never heard of it quite that way before. I said, that's the way it is, baby. I'm clean. Whatever I got to do, I'll do, But isn't that a wonderful way to be? It just doesn't scare me anymore. Now, oddly enough, you can make of this what you wanted. Prayers went out for me all over the world. And they asked what I wanted prayed for, and I said, the people who love me, because this is awfully quick. And if something should happen, their hearts will be broken. I said, I want you to pray for them because they really love me well. And they didn't listen to me. They prayed for a healing, and I went into the hospital that next day, and they all of a sudden put me up on the angioplasty. And if you've ever had one of those fun things, they run a camera and all that up your groin in the vein, and you can watch yourself on TV, what I wanted to see. And the doctor's pumping away on this heart thing, and he said, Ed, he said, I don't get it. And I said, what don't you get? He said, your heart's perfect. You got the heart of an 11-year-old. He said, we must have made a mistake. I said, well, you call it what you want. I'll call it what I want. Have a good day, Doc. And to this day, whenever I see Dr. Coyne, he goes. But anyway, that's the way the weekend's going to be. I don't use notes. Not that I think I'm brilliant. I just want the Spirit to lead me wherever we need to go. And I want to be in tune with what the room needs. And I believe everybody puts off an energy. It's a good energy or a bad energy. I don't hang around much with bad energy because I just don't want to play. I used to love bad energy. I used to be a creator of bad energy. But I started drinking at a very early age. I don't know when I started drinking. Dad used to think it was funny to give me a drink and get me drunk when I was a kid. I was the youngest of 7, and I come from a very elite group of people called white trash. And, there were certain things that were expected of us, and by gosh, we came through with all of them, And we were just a group that the cops were at the house every week, and I hated life going in. I don't know about you, but I had this sense that there's something wrong with me. That I'm somehow different. There's something wrong with me. Now, oddly enough, 35 years later, I think of it, is there something right about me? There's something different. Isn't that amazing? See, my biggest problem going is I started to conform to what you thought I should be. And you know what they thought I should be? They thought I should be dead by the time I'm 20. They thought I should go to prison the same way my brother was in prison. They thought all those things, and I thought, okay, guess they're right. I started doing something then that I carried into my sobriety, and I have to be very careful today not to do it. And I call it my 299 to 1 theory. I could walk into a room with 300 people, 299 could turn around to me and say, Ed, you're the best. We love you. One could go, jerk. Guess who I remembered? I'd sit up in bed 3 nights later going, why would they say that? Why would they think that? Even sober? What? Somebody doesn't like me? Now, I'd beat you to death when I was out there on the street, but God forbid you didn't like me, And I would collect those ones in my life. It got to the point of where in my life and in every area of my life, the 299 didn't even exist anymore. It was just the ones that I remembered. That teacher in kindergarten, the first day I went to school, smacked me right across the face. Miss Kiesick, not that I remember. And I remember Miss Kiesick, but some years ago I was thinking about that. And I remember Miss Kiesick well, but I can't remember all the other wonderful teachers that tried their best to help me. They never worked their way into my story. It was the one. Miss Kiesick, my kindergarten teacher, and I hated school, but my own choice all the while I went there. Thank God they booted me out in 7th grade. And I was pleased they did, because I hadn't been paying attention for a couple of years anyway. But I was just tired. I got sober at 20 years old. And a lot of people say, oh, that's young. Well, how old do you have to be to die? What is the age limit on that? We were talking at supper, and one of the things I get a kick out of is people go, oh, it's so good to see you get this so young. And I think, if we were cancer survivors, would we go into the hospital of a 16-year-old go, we're so glad you got cancer so young. You won't have to hurt like we did. Your chemo will be much easier. What are people that? Well, I know what they're thinking, but isn't that crazy? I had to drink to balance the ones in my life, because the ones were killing me. I'd wake up with the ones, and I'd blot out the ones, and I'd blot them out, but you know what had happened that next morning when I'd wake, and the terror of the ones. I had a faith long before I got to AA. Now, I had a lot of ones about church and about God. I mean, to be offensive to no one, please believe me. But my feeling about God at a very early age is bring him down, I'll beat the sheet off the punk. If he's a God, why is there starving children? If he's a God, why isn't there any food in our refrigerator? Yeah, you good, God is good. Really? Come to my house. You could say I had a little issue with God. And I collected a lot of ones. And you can collect a lot of ones where God's concerned. I remember when I was 10 years old, I had a cousin, Linda. If there was anybody close to God, it was Linda. She was amazing. She was beautiful. She was talented. She was at the top of her class. I couldn't stand her. She just did everything right. And in my heart, she was up here and I was down here. Like my older sister, I used to call her Miss Titsy Pritzum. And I remember making my amends. It's one of the tougher ones I made. I said, I am so sorry that I gave you so much help because you were so kind and so good. But I felt I never could compete, so I'd attack you. And she cried. And she said, I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. And I said, no, sis, you were doing everything right. And I did never see me being able to do that, And the ones in church, my cousin Linda was walking across the streets one day, and a truck hit and killed her, knocked her 200 feet. And I went to the funeral, and people were saying, God must have wanted an angel. And I thought, so he hits you with a truck. I'll pass, You know what? I still do. That's how he makes angels. I'd just as soon not be one, And I started collecting ones. God rips people out of your life. People that you really care about, because he thinks they're more needed there. So that was a one in my bag about church. I remember going to church. My mother, God bless her, I used to think she's crazy. She's just stark raving crazy. I'm the youngest of 7 children. She had an alcoholic husband. And she'd be sitting there in the house. She'd be coming down. She'd be reading scripture. And I think she's nuts. And I've realized now she was the only sane one there. But she had been, thank God, to Al-Anon. And I'm not one of these people that take any shots at Al-Anon. I thank God for Al-Anon. Because you helped give my mother her sanity and peace back. She had a terribly strong faith, but was losing it because of alcoholism. And because of the steps and the work she did in Al-Anon, she regained her faith and came back stronger than it had ever been. And in fact, you gave me back my mother. It's funny how when we talk in AA and in Al-Anon, I don't know about you, but I was a parent abuser. We never mentioned that, but I'd tell you what they didn't do for me. But I was a horrible kid. I was a challenger. My mother told me no, I'd stay on her till she broke down in tears and would say, for crying out loud, Ed, just go do it. You're going to do it anyway. And I'd laugh. And I got the nerve to come in here and tell you I didn't have good parents. No, my parents had a big problem. They had a real rotten kid. And it wasn't about me being alcoholic. It was about me being having a bad attitude by choice and mixed alcohol in with it. I don't want to blame all my defects of character on my ism. It was on my personality and a lot of choices I made as well. That's why when I get sober, that's why a lot of people in my experience have a lot of trouble, because they do a pretty good job of handling the booze problem. But these other monsters come creeping up on them and get them by the throat. And then they're saying, what's this all about? Well, there's a lot of areas of our life. In my understanding, we got to work these steps in every area of our life. That's what we're going to be talking about this weekend. Because I promise you this, whatever area of your life you're not working this program, it's the one that owns you. It's the one that owns you or will own you. It's just that simple. And I remember I'd go to church, and there was some guy set up front. All spiritual people have thin blue lips, talk like this. Ministers, rabbis, priests, you name it, all talk like this. And there was this guy sitting in the front row. He had thin blue lips too. And I looked at him and I thought, he looked a lot happier in the bar last night. He really looked a lot happier. And I don't know who that grumpy broad is he's sitting with, but the gal he was with last night seemed to be a lot more fun too. And he'd sit there and go. And you know what I thought? Hypocrite. Now I know you're not this sick, but I was. I didn't only judge that guy and his wife in that row. I judged entire organized religion by my little narrow mind and my little narrow point of view. For years. Absolutely for years. You see, I had my ones. And if I had my ones, reality didn't count. I'd look at my ones. And the ones were what was killing me. And so when I imagine my disappointment when I got to AA, and in the old days they did, I always love people that say, I love that spiritual part. There is no spiritual part. The steps are spiritual in essence. There's an intellectual part. But it is a spiritual program. Spiritual, and its entire message is to help you find a relationship with God that you can live with. That's what it's about. It isn't about improving self. It isn't about processing and working through, and it isn't about... It's about surrender. Just the opposite. When I first came into AA, we used to spend a lot of time about humility and smashing the ego at depth. You don't hear that much anymore. Now they call it self-esteem when it's dressed up as ego. And self-righteousness, and I deserve this, and I deserve that. I don't know about you, that's what got me here. That's nothing new. That's nothing new. Oh, you want me to think about me for a while? Gee, I'll try. Don't know how I'll fit that into my busy schedule. And not that it can't be helpful. Not that all that can't be wonderfully helpful. But if it's become your God, you got another problem. The answer's still out here. Or here, rather than here. Man, I didn't like my life at all. At the ripe old age of 13, I was arrested by the Iowa Highway Patrol for possession of a sawed-off shotgun. I had a double-barreled 12-gauge and it was 14 inches long, and when I pulled that out, in my size, I seemed to get a lot of attention. And I seemed to be in charge. And I really liked that a lot. And I remember when the police pulled me over and they arrested me for that. The cops were going to teach me a lesson because I had a brother in prison. And they said, let's throw him in a hole for a few days, show him what it's like. Let's teach him a lesson. They did. I was a cop fighter from then on. Absolutely. If I saw a badge, I swung. I don't care if you were crossing guard, I'd take you out. I would. You can't hurt me as much as you've already have, was my head. Kill me, I'd be a hero. I'd finally be something in my neighborhood. Cop took me out. Okay. Isn't that amazing? And I believed it. So January 5th of 1971, when I found myself waking up in the middle of the street after a car accident, pretending like I was knocked out. I'm not sure why I was doing that, but it seemed like the thing to do at the time. All of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I didn't have any answers. I didn't have any cute comebacks. Oh, I found those again later in AA. We'll talk about sarcasm this weekend because I became an expert at it. I was running away the very people that loved me the most with this charming little mouth. But I was laying there that night, and I remember the cops coming up, and they said, that's mute him, don't touch him, he's the scum of the earth, don't even cover him. And it was 18 below zero that night. It was awfully cold. And the most amazing thing happened. I didn't have any argument left. I agreed. It was no longer the way I was raised, what I did or didn't have, what my family did or didn't give me, how this person or that person treated me, whether I was molested or not, and I'm one of those that was molested, enjoyed it quite a bit. I'm sorry, it's just not popular to say, but I'm one of those that never had a problem with that. Is it wrong? Sure. But I'm not going to proclaim guilt. I no longer want to find a victim at any given spot or be a victim at any given spot. I realized none of that was valid for me anymore. And they rolled me into the hospital, and some nurse was standing there, and she said, "Ed, do you want me to call AA?" And I said, "Might as well." Now, as people who've been around for a while want to know why you new people can't be sincere like we were in the old days. Might as well. That was my entry back into AA. Or into AA, because I'd been sent to AA, but I didn't pay it much mind. Those were nice, kind people, but they were a little too old for me, And they weren't quite hip. Excuse me while I take a little drink. You want to know the difference between an Al-Anon and an AA speaker? I can show you real quick. An Al-Anon speaker goes like this when she's talking. She goes, "Excuse me." And then an AA speaker goes, "So let me finish." But I was laying in there, and they took me into the hospital. And any wine connoisseurs in here? Yeah. I like the good stuff. The stuff with the twist-off caps. I tried to stay with the higher line. And Ariba, Mad Dog 2020, Thunderbird. Oh, God. That stuff has never seen a grape ever. It was so bad. It was so bad I had to hold my nose to drink it. Otherwise, I had another problem, Trouble with that, and I'm one of those, I believe in singleness of purpose, but I also need to tell you that there was nothing I wouldn't take. One sentence that never came out of my mouth, a question that ever came out of my mouth is, "Oh, what'll this do to you?" Mine was, "Got any more?" "Yeah, that's pretty good. Got any more?" At one point in 2 years before I got sober, I was down to 138 pounds. And when you're at that time 6'11", believe me, it's not a pretty sight, especially when you're on crutches and got a back brace. But I'm in this hospital, and I've been drinking that wine. And if you drink enough of that wine, it has a wonderful thing you get in the morning. It's a little gift from the winery, and it's called the dry heaves. Oh, and then. And then you get a little slobbery, just come on. And you do that about 3 times, and then you get the toenails. The good news about that is you're just about done, And then I wandered back, and I was sweating like I'm sweating now from doing my dry heaves. And I got back in the bed, and this guy came in. His name's Hap, short for Happy, and he's from AA. And he said, "Hi, Ed, my name's Hap. I'm from Alcoholics Anonymous." I thought, get out of my room. Gee. And he said, "We don't drink and we don't use one day at a time." And I don't know why I got honest that day. I don't know why. Maybe it was just my time. I said, "I can't make it a whole day without something. Because when this starts, gotta go." And he said, "Ed, all we have to do is try. All you have to do is try." And that's the only thing I've done consistently from that day to this is try. Try to be a better person today than I was yesterday. And don't drink. One day at a time. And for me, not take anything of a mood-altering nature. And that hasn't changed even with the wonderful recent discoveries that they come up with about every 10 years where we lose a whole hunk of our membership because the experts found out another way. I simply say this: if you're chemically addicted, you're chemically addicted, and chemicals won't help you. That's been my experience. I remember he said that, and that's my sobriety date. And from that date to this, I haven't had any vacations, haven't had any, I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous and I've been sober. Now that's impossible because I don't do anything consistently except get in trouble. I did that quite consistently, or cause pain to the people I love. I was very effective at that. but to actually not drink one day at a time. And God blessed me because I knew instinctively I had to keep busy. And I did. I would not. God gave me some great inspiration going in. He said, Ed, if you think it's a good idea, don't do it. If you're new, believe me, those are words to live by. If you think it's if you've been here a little while, those are good ideas. If you think it's a good idea, run it past your sponsor. Just a suggestion. But I knew if I thought it was a good idea to absolutely not do it, and I knew to keep busy. And thank you, God, I kept busy. And I started going to A&A meetings, and man, I'd walk in there, and they were just kind of wonderful to me. I remember when I got sober, I had shoulder-length hair, and I always wore dark glasses. And I had a tie-dyed shirt on and jeans and a chain around my waist, a motorcycle chain, and a swastika around my neck. I'm not sure why that annoyed people, but it really seemed to annoy them. So I had that baby because that'd be a fight and that'd be fun. And I had my look. I can't do my look anymore. I used to have such a great look. I had a look that would make you back out of the room. It was this little sneer. I remember I was about 2-3 months sober, and I walked into the meeting one day, and Logan, he buried him with 56 years of sobriety. Logan said, "How are you, Ed?" And I said, "Fine, Logan." He said, "Ed, why don't you tell your face? It doesn't know." I didn't know, so I changed that. Over the weekend. You're going to hear me say this a lot. You want a spiritual awakening? Change your mind about a few things. It's that simple. It's that simple. And when he said that, I changed my mind about my look. And I've never had people tell me anymore, "God, you okay? What's wrong?" In fact, they smile when they see me. And God, in my worst days of drinking, all I ever wanted to do was feel like I belonged somewhere. Feel like we had some sort of connection. And if you're a drunk like me, when you feel so odd, you'll start behaving odd and say it's by choice. That way you got some control. And I started going to more and more meetings, and it was just a matter of time. I knew they were going to bring up that 3-letter word. You know which one I'm talking about. I knew it was going to come up. I was about a month and a half sober, and sure enough, somebody turned to me and said, "Ed, don't you think it's about time you started thinking about a job?" I didn't like that idea at all, because I was a pretty good thief, and I thought, well, I'm still doing enough to make ends meet. We don't have to get crazy about this, I had to get out of the burglary business because I was pretty easy to identify. It's him, officer. That's what's going on. I really felt cheated at the time. I really did. I thought, geez, I can't do anything right. But then they threw a curve to me. They said, "Ed, we're not only talking about cash register honesty. We're talking about emotional honesty." I made a point of not knowing how I felt for a long, long time. And these guys said, "You're going to start having to tell us how you're really feeling." And when I sponsor people, one of the requirements I have, and I'm one of those that have requirements, simply because I know how it works for me and how it doesn't. And that's all I know. And that's how we got to do it, or I don't know how to do it. But I tell them, you got to call me and you got to be honest with me. And if it's a crappy day, just don't try to fool your sponsor. "Oh, it's okay, everything." No, I want to hear where you're at. So if you learn how to get out of there, you don't ever have to go back there again. Because I would lie. I would lie when the truth would serve me better. Anybody else here? I would just lie. I've got a 26-year-old son in Southern California who's majoring in methamphetamines right now, studying for a scholarship in Narcotics Anonymous. And his mother called me when he was 19, and she said, "You need to talk to your son." Any divorced people, you'll know what that's all about. Your son when it's trouble. And I said, "Why? What's going on?" She said, "He came home loaded last night. He was wearing shades in the middle of the night, and he was pulling things out of the sky and talking to people that weren't there." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, let me talk to him." So he got on the phone. I said, his name's Vici. I said, "Vici, how you doing?" He said, "Oh, cool, Dad. Everything's good, man. How are you?" I said, "Good." I said, "Do you want to tell me about last night?" You know what he said? "What?" I said, "About the police and about you coming home." He said, "Dad, you aren't going to believe this." And I thought, "Oh, I'll bet you I won't." And he said, "I went to Taco Bell and I got a bad taco." And I said, "Do you have any idea who you're trying to lay this on?" And then he won my heart, because you know what he said? No, Dad, it's the truth. To this day, if I called him up and said, Betsy, a few years ago, that talk about, it's the truth, Dad. It's the kind of liar I was. I would be caught dead and still lie to you. So when they talk to me, Richard Pryor was a guy that I always loved his comedy and that when he first came out. And he used to say a line that I think any person with an addictive personality can identify with. He said he was with this other woman and his wife walked in on him. This is a true story, by the way. And his wife walked in on him and she got really upset. And he said to her, "Are you going to believe me or your lying eyes?" See, I understand that. You're going to believe me or those lying eyes of yours? You know how they've been wrong before. So I had to start being honest. I had to start talking. And then they brought up God, and that was a tremendous disappointment to me. I had a faith long before I got here. I lived it every day, every moment. My faith was life sucks. Murphy's Law, if something bad could happen, it's going to. It's just a matter of time before something bad happens. That was my faith. I believed it. I professed it. And guess what? It came to be one day at a time. So faith wasn't anything new to me. I just had faith in all the wrong things. And what they said when I come to AA is I said, well, I'm not going to believe in that guy. And they said, well, you don't have to believe in that guy. I said, you can come up with a God of your very own. And I said, really? And they said, yeah. I said, I can make up my own. And they said, yeah. I said, okay. So I thought for a couple of days, very deep in thought. And I come to a meeting and I said, my God's going to be kind and loving and forgiving. How do you like them apples? They didn't seem to mind. They kind of giggled like you did. And I thought, see there, they just can't stand an original idea. That's what it is. But why I share that with you is that is 180 degrees from anything I ever put about God in this head. I had a lot of ones about God. And none of them was about being kind and loving and forgiving. None of it. So that was just 180 degrees from what I'd ever thought about that. And that worked wonderfully for me. But then I made a mistake sober. And I see a lot of people making it. I didn't know it was a mistake at the time. I started professing a faith that I didn't have. I had people around me that really talked about God, and the eyes are the mirror of the soul, period. And I'd look into their eyes and they'd talk about God, and I knew they were telling the truth. I couldn't figure out their angle, but I knew they were telling the truth. So what I did, and the mistake I made, is I started parroting what they'd say. God's in his heaven, all's right with the world. Have you prayed today? That's what you want to hear. Some newcomer coming into a meeting and you're ready to kill your boss at work, and the newcomer comes up and says, have you prayed today? Thank God I'm as big as I am. They would have took me out, I'm sure. And I didn't see anything wrong with that because after all, those old timers said it. Well, I'm one of those that believe and have indeed experienced that if you, the only defense you're going to have against a first drink or anything else in your life eventually is a relationship with a higher power. That's going to be your only defense. Well, guess what if you don't really have one? I was a little over a year sober. And Dad invited me over for dinner. Now, I don't know how it is in your house, but our house was chaos. It had been better. Dad had gone to treatment. He was really trying to stay sober. He was cut down immensely, and Mom seemed to be somewhat happy. And Dad asked me over for dinner. Well, when I got asked over for dinner, it was usually because I was in trouble. And I really didn't want to go, and I went to the rooms, and you guys told me that if anything's going to change in my home, it had to begin with me. I couldn't wait for them to shape up before I'd come back. If I wanted to change things, it had to start right here. And they said, get a new attitude and go to your parents' house for dinner. And if you got something to atone for it. Boy, I'd never thought of that before. And I did. I went there, and about halfway through dinner, Dad said, boy, and I thought, oh, here it comes. I said, yeah, Pop. I said, just want to tell you I'm proud of you. Now, I got to tell you something. If you're new or if you're used, they tell you in AA that miracles happen. And I'm here to tell you that indeed they do. That has been my experience countless times. But my own man telling me he's proud, that didn't even make my list of miracles. That was far beyond anybody's comprehension. And he looked at me that night the way I'd always dreamed my father would look at his son. And it was one of the best nights of my life ever. And you know where I had to go then? I had to go to a meeting. Man, that's good stuff. And I went to that meeting, and after the meeting I went to my sister-in-law's house, and I'm going to move this up just a bit now. Went to my sister-in-law's house, and my mother called. She was crying and hysterical and said, "Ed, come home quick." And I said, "Mom, what's wrong?" She said, "Dad went across the street to get him a beer and me a bottle of pop, and now they're carrying bodies out. There's police everywhere. Please come home." And I jumped in my car that night, and I thought, well, God's in his heaven. All's right with the world. Now that I found God, nothing bad can really happen. And I pulled up in front of that bar where I drank from the time I was 11 years old. In fact, I've still never had a legal drink in my life. But I was in there every night till the year before when I got sober. And I went up there, and there were more policemen than I'd ever seen, ever. And all of them knew me. But it's funny how those cops shaped up that year I was sober. Yeah, I found out some amazing things. If I don't talk about their heritage, they don't talk about my heritage. If I don't talk about their sexual habits, they usually don't talk about my sexual habits. You know? Amazing discoveries once you get sober. You don't swing at them, they usually keep their clubs in their holders. You know, man, what information! I could have used this a long time ago. And I'd also been working in the courts. We used to have a wonderful relationship with the court system where if a member of AA came in and you had any problem with drugs or alcohol, they would simply say, "Ed, take Arnie, bring him back in 30 days. Tell us what you think." And people were staying sober in droves. It was just amazing. Then, thank God, the professionals came in and helped us. Anyway, at that time, it was just amazing, and the reason I mention that is those cops saw me in court, and they knew I was sober. Nobody believed I could stay sober, especially me. I remember the night of my first year birthday. I prayed, and I said, "Oh, this is too important. Am I sure? Am I sure?" And I tried to think the best I could. Was there any place where I, cheated here, cheated there? And I was just amazed and in tears that there wasn't. I couldn't believe it. And these cops couldn't believe it either, but they saw me often and in court. So when I walked in, I walked up to an officer that was standing there, and he said, "Ed, what are you doing here?" And I said, "My dad was in here." He said, "Oh my God, Ed." And I said, "Why? What's wrong?" And he said, "Ed, all we know at this point is somebody came in and just opened fire and shot everybody." And I looked down the bar, and I saw a pool of blood with my father's glasses all smashed up and mangled and laying in the blood. And I got so sad, and I didn't want to know. If you've ever been through anything like that, you know exactly what I mean. I just don't want that information. September 11th, you don't want that information. You turn the TV back on. And it was just horrifying to me. And the most amazing thing happened. I turned to my old arch enemy, the cops, and said, "What do? I don't know what to do." Because the old me said, "Get crazy and start taking people out and even the score. Eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, baby." And I'd been around you for a year, and you taught me to say, "I don't know what to do. I know if I do what I think's good, it's not good. What do I do?" And he was so kind. He said, "Ed, go up to the hospital." He said, "Some of the people are alive, some are dead, but they're all up at the hospital." And I went up there, and I saw an officer up there that hadn't forgotten my past, and he wasn't kind, and he was very rude, and told me to leave in no uncertain terms, called me a few names, and said if I didn't leave, he'd have me arrested for obstruction of justice, that he had identified everybody in there, and my old man wasn't one of them. So I went home, and I called the one guy I would have never believed I'd call ever, and that was the cop that the last 5 years of my drinking and using tried to put me away. He used to put me in the back of his squad car and say, "Ed, if I see you leaving the scene of the crime, or think I see you leaving the scene of the crime, I'm going to shoot to kill and not to stop." And I say, "Everything's fair in love and war, chump." And he used to say to me, "I'm going to bust you, Ed, and I'm going to bust you straight up. When I get you, you're going away for a long time." And I'd laugh and say, "Yeah, you come after me, big fella." You know why I called him? He was an honest cop. He could have had me 50 ways from loose if he wanted to. But he was a man of integrity. He told me, "I'm going to catch you straight up." That's the guy I called. Hadn't talked to him the year I was sober. Hadn't talked to him before I got sober, really, except those little conversations we used to have in the back of his squad car from time to time. And that's the guy I called, and he said, "Ed, what's going on?" And I said, "Bob, my dad was in that Shamrock," and he said, "Oh my God, Ed, hold on." And he fed me information as it come in. Later, Bob said to me, and Bob, I love Bob. He's a good man. He said to me, Ed, he said, I was so afraid for you that night. He said, I know you'd been sober. And he said, with this hitting you, and my brother was out of prison, and he was a violent guy, like I was a violent guy. He said, I just prayed that you'd be okay. And if you could make it through that, you could make it through anything. He told me one time, he said, I'd get so tired of being on the police force. He was in the narco division. And he'd say, some mornings I'd get up and I'd just throw my gun and my badge back in the drawer and say, I can't take it anymore. I just don't even want to go out there. And then he would say to me, Ed, you came to mind. And you've done so well. And I thought, well, if Ed can do it, maybe others can do it. Maybe I'll go to work one more day. We never know the effect we're having on people with our sobriety. But he came up with Ed. The only thing we can come up with is he was taken hostage or he wandered outside. And he's outside somewhere. And it was one of those freezing rainy nights and just terrible cold. And I'm sure you get him up here with a 1/4-inch ice over everything, And we searched the streets all night. At 10 o'clock or 8 o'clock the next morning, that officer from the hospital called me up and said, well, Ed, anybody could have made a mistake. You want to come up and identify your old man? And I said, okay. And I went up there and I walked into that morgue and I saw my daddy laying there with that bullet hole in his face. And I reached for that faith I'd been professing and I came up with absolutely nothing. Because it was everybody else's experience and none of my work. None of my surrenders. None of my reaching out. And I got to tell you, that was the most terrifying and lonely time I've ever had in my life. But God did for me what I could not do for myself. I opened the door of that morgue and I'd walk out and there were members of Al-Anon and AA already there. And just the look in their eye, I had a sense that I was going to be okay. And that I'm not alone. And I was so grateful for that. A lot of times people say, I don't know what to say. Just look them right in the eye. It tells them everything. Just go, give them a call. Go wash your dish. Go pick up a kid. Go do a little laundry because they got company coming. Just do whatever your heart tells you to. Nothing is too silly. In fact, the more silly it sounds, probably the more meaningful it's going to be to that individual. Because that's something God gave, my opinion, gave you uniquely to do. And so I was so grateful that they were there. And immediately the love of AA and Al-Anon enveloped me and carried me. Because I was 20 years of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and 1 year of live and let live. And live and let live was winning, but that anger and that rage had just come up back to me, and it was just terrible. Eventually they came to me and said, you got to testify in court because you identified the body and the billfold and all that. And I thought, boy. And then people in AA said, Ed, you might be the only example of AA anybody ever sees, so you got to behave yourself in court. And I thought, what an order. I can't go through with it. Court was fun time. That's when you stir up the bailiff, see how many of them takes you to get you out of there, But I did, because already you had meant to me more than my own self-image. I had begun to lose myself into something much bigger. And so I went and I did the impossible. I remember walking into that courtroom, and there was a guy sitting there with his little do and his little attitude, and I thought, you give me 5 minutes with him, we don't need a trial. In fact, bring all 5 of the gangbangers in, I'll take care of them in short order. That's what I thought. What I did is I behaved. It's the first time I ever realized that my feelings were not facts. Before then, I would have been over the rail and I would have had that bunk. And no court in the world would have ever convicted me. It's still Iowa's most heinous murder. And please God, it always stays that way. That's one record I'd like to keep. Let that be the worst that ever happened. But I was amazed because I sat there and I answered the questions and I left. And as God would have it, they all got sentenced, and this guy got 3 life sentences and 135 years, so I knew he was going to be gone for a while. And shortly after that, God talked to me. Now, you got to be careful when God talks to you. Those sponsors are great God filters, by the way. And if you don't have a sponsor, I really strongly suggest you get one. I remember one time I told my sponsor, I said, I got a message from God. He said, oh, really? And I said, yeah. He said, well, why don't you share it with me, Ed? So I shared my message from God with him. And he said, Ed, this message from God looks strangely like your handwriting. Okay. And indeed it was. But I also got to tell you, and we'll talk about it later in the weekend, 86, 87, and 88 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous gives you specific instructions how to live every second of every moment of every minute of every day, and how to have a conscious, consistent contact with God. It's right there in the book. All you got to do is read it and do it. Most importantly, do it. And when God talked to me that time, He said, Ed, go out to California, go into show business. I thought, well, my resume fits pretty good. So I loaded up the car and I went to where all stars get their start, Anaheim, California. Got a job at Disneyland. I was goofy. Little did they know how well I did the role at that point. 2.5 years sober, no sponsor, not many meetings. I was goofy, And by accident, I went up to this meeting in West LA, and the meeting was so enthusiastic, and they were living Alcoholics Anonymous. They were a living example. I mean, they were taking people to meetings, and they knew that 12-step calls was more than verification of insurance, or if you could get them into treatment. It was about bringing them into your home. I love in AA sometimes. Well, we're not a housing agency, and we're not an employment agency, and we're not a bank. God forbid, don't read Working with Others, because it says just the opposite if the situation is required. But those are just two people who are too damn tight to look past their own nose, in my opinion. And I lost my place. I got to start all over now. My name's Ed, and I'm an alcoholic. But I walked into this room, and these people were there, and the excitement and the love of life was just in there. You could taste it. It was wonderful. And I went up again the next week to see if it was still there, and it was still there. They were hugging and laughing and joking, and they were having a ball sober. And man, that was so attractive. And this guy came up to me, and I said, "Excuse me, would you be my sponsor?" He said, "No." I thought, "Why not?" He said, "Anybody I sponsor has to look up to me." Ha ha ha. I thought, "Oh, good, tall jokes. That's what I need." Haven't heard those before. It's always the same two questions by the same size person. First question, "Oh, how tall are you?" 6'10". Next question, "Oh, do you play basketball?" And I say, "No, how tall are you?" And they say, 5'4". And I say, "Do you play miniature golf?" It's their rules. I'm just trying to get along. But I thought, tall jokes, yeah, that's what I really need to hear. Especially those, "How's the weather up there?" Oh, that's original. Yeah. But I thought, oh boy. And he came up to me a few minutes later, shook my hand, and he said, "If you agree to do a few things, I'll be glad to be your sponsor. My name's Clancy." And I'm forever grateful I didn't hear some of the things that are said about that guy. I really am. You know why? I would have believed you and you would have killed me. I was ready to blow my brains out sober. Sobriety sucked big time. I'm doing the best I can, and my guts are all over the floor every day. And I'm looking at bridge abutments as I'm driving home thinking, man, I can't take this sobriety stuff. And if I'd heard some of the things that were said about Clancy, he would have been the last guy on earth I would ever talk to. Thank God I didn't hear him, And that's for gossip. I'm not a big gossip guy. And I hope you, if you have been, you stop. And I'll share two things with you. If you're hanging around with gossip, you need to know, or gossips, you need to know when you leave the room, you're the next topic. Yeah. The other thing is never confide in them, because they are not trustworthy. Now I know that offends some people. That's what the truth does sometimes. But if you're telling other people's secrets, you're going to tell everybody's secrets sooner or later. And I was so grateful because he just looked me right in the eye, and I knew he knew. And I didn't ever have to feel this way again, that there was an answer. He knew exactly where I was at. And I would do anything in my power to stay sober and stay sane one day at a time. And he insisted that I started all over on the steps, that if I was that crazy, I missed something along the way. And I suggested to him that I was 2.5 years sober, and at that time was an addictions counselor and pretty much the expert on addiction. He pointed out to me that if I was that good, I probably wouldn't be living in his garage. Well, he had a point there, so okay, I'll listen. And he insisted that sponsors are wonderful because they help you do things I would have never asked. I remember when you get a sponsor, you can ask them those questions that you wouldn't ask anybody else. At least I would. I remember one time I walked up to him and I said, "Clancy, how do you be a gentleman? How do you do that?" And he said, "Ed, you act like one." I would have never thought of that. You mean you just act? Yeah. Act the way you think a gentle man would act. And I've been doing it ever since. There was no big process that I went through, no inventories I had to write. You want to be a better spouse? Be one. Act like it. Want to be a better wife, better employee, better husband? Act like it. Want to be a better father? Act like it. Talk's cheap. People around me don't say, oh, I'm trying to do this or I'm working on this, because I just cut them off and say, all that tells me is you're not ready to make a commitment to do anything. Call me back when you're ready. Call me back when you're ready. Isn't that true? Just means if I'm working on it, means I'm just not ready enough to say, oops, I stopped. I quit. No more from here, and I'll do whatever it takes not to do that. It's called surrender. And Clancy was amazing to me. He helped me a great deal, and he insisted I do things that made no sense to me. He made me shake everybody's hand, and at that time the group was small. It was only 400 people. And I had to stand at the door and shake everybody's hand. I said, I don't want to shake their hand. I don't like them people. He said, they don't like you either, Ed. Go shake their hand. Hi, I'm Ed. Hi, I'm Ed. I'm Ed. And oddly enough, I've had jobs after that going all over the world into places I don't know anybody. And I have to go in and say, hi, I'm Ed. You're just teaching me how to fit in. You know how to break that click? Hi. Know how to fit in? Hi, I'm Ed. I was an outcast by choice and got a big ego about it. And that was very important for me. I remember I was going to talk in Pasadena, California. And Pasadena is a wealthy area. And I thought, ooh, wealthy area, I may hook up with a job. And I caught myself doing that hustle, and I stopped. Because after my father's murder, I did something that was very important for me. I started all over with God. I stopped, and my first honest prayer I ever said is, God, I don't know if you're there or not. I sure hope so. That's right where I was at. And I started all over right where I was at, because that's the only place you could grow from. All the rest is nonsense. And I got down on my knees and I asked God to just let me go to that meeting. I said the same prayer I said before I came down here and before this retreat. I said, let me share the miracle you've performed in my life through Alcoholics Anonymous. Save me from my own nonsense. And I don't want anything from these people. I've already been vastly overpaid. I don't want anything. And I went and talked. After I got done talking, a guy come up to me after the meeting and said, this makes no sense to me. We want to offer you a job. I said, it makes perfect sense to me. He said, have you ever been in Taiwan? I said, no. He said, have you ever been in show business management? I said, no. He said, be in my office Monday morning. That was Saturday. Thursday, I was lifting out of Los Angeles International Airport, going to Taipei, Taiwan. I was new, soon to be vice president of America on Ice. I had a cast of 62 cast and crew. I was going over to Taipei, Taiwan to negotiate contracts with the Taiwanese government while flying back and forth to Hong Kong with designer Bill Campbell out of Las Vegas designing costumes. How was your week? Now, you know why I share that story with you? You talked me into dropping my bag of ones. There would have been a time when I wouldn't even gone for the interview, because I had ones in my head that said, people like you don't do things like that. You're going to end up dead. No, you're white trash. You're worthless. And you made me drop them all. And I showed up for the interview. And it was wonderful. I remember getting off the plane and everybody's this tall. And they're looking at me and I'm looking at them, you know. I know it's just a matter of time before they tie me down. And I had a great time over there. I loved everything about it. I loved everything about Taiwan. The people, the culture. God, it fed me like I'd never been fed before. And I was down in Kaohsiung and I was ending my tour there. And the guy walked by me one night and he said, you know, you'd be an excellent manager for the Harlem Globetrotters. And I said, yeah, sure. Went home to Los Angeles and I got a call from the president of the Harlem Globetrotters. Said, is this Ed Mutum? And I said, yes. And they said, we've heard wonderful things about you. Would you come up to our office? I said, I'd be honored to. Next thing you know, I'm manager of the Harlem Globetrotters. At this point, I'm 8 years sober. I got less than a 7th grade education. I have no business background. I have no business by everything I know even having that job. Yet they picked me over 50 people. I don't know how powerful your God is, But mine's dazzling. Mine's amazing. He does stuff like that. And I get to go along. And all of a sudden I traveled all over the world and met kings and queens and presidents. And all of a sudden the most amazing thing happened. I'd be in limos and in suites in the finest hotels in the world, and the most amazing thing was I fit there. Now let me explain what I mean by that. I belong there. You know why? Because God gave it to me. I don't argue with gifts anymore. I just say thank you. Oh, I don't deserve. People make me crazy in AA when I say, how are you? And they say, oh, much better than I deserve. I say, oh, God's still wrong, huh? You know? How about just saying thank you? Would that, how would that work? And that's what I say to God in my life. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I met the daughter of the Turkish ambassador to London. She was Muslim. She was beautiful. Still the most beautiful woman I've ever known. And she was wealthy, and I thought, well, our backgrounds are a lot alike, so we got married. I didn't say all judgment had returned, and we were married for 10 years, and she's an amazing woman who absolutely hates my guts every breath I take. And there's absolutely nothing I can do about that. And I don't say that to be a smart aleck, because my kids have paid a heavy price. I have 3 children that hardly have talked to me in the last 20 years because of the hatred and the anger. And I made a major mistake. I realized this last year. I always took the high road. I would never say anything discouraging about their mother or anything else, but I realized in not responding to the charges, they automatically assumed they were true. So that was a tough one to learn. I cried all day when I figured out that one, because I thought, I'm trying to do the right thing. Why does this keep happening? And then I realized they got no choice then but to believe her, because I would never answer the charges, so to speak. Not put down her mother, just give them my side. 2 months ago, my 20-year-old daughter called me and said, Dad, I need some money. Can you help me? And I cried, because she'd never asked me for anything. And I said, oh, sweetie, it's tight, but I guarantee you're going to get something. And something was on its way in a very, very short while after that. But I was so honored that she trusted me enough, after all that she's been through, to ask me for help. I mean, that was one of the best nights of my sobriety. And my 20-year-old just failed the psychological test for the Sheriff's Department in Los Angeles. And they said he has some anger issues. And he called me and he said, Dad, do you know anything about that? And I said, oh, yeah. Yeah. And he's going to come out and spend the summer with me. And I share that with you because we went for years and I didn't have any contact, and there was bitterness, and there was just a mess. It was just not a nice thing. And people would say to me, I didn't know you had children. And I said, well, that's because when I talk about them, I get really sad. And I've given them to God, and I got to leave them there. My way of leaving them there is just to leave them there. And then if God wants them to talk to me, they'll be calling me. And if He wants it restored, then He'll restore. My job is to be ready and present when it occurs. That's my job. And there was a tremendous freedom from that. And in '88, I went back out to Iowa. I'd lost everything I owned. I made some business decisions that were just bad. They were out of greed. They were all money-based. They were all materially based. And within 6 months, I lost everything. I mean, they even took the Mercedes. They really got personal. And I thought, well, I got to start all over. Why not go home? So I went back home to Iowa after living in Los Angeles 16 years. And I ended up with a boarded-up house on East 6th Street, 8 blocks from where I was in the middle of the street 18 years before that. And I opened the big book and I read the promises, and I said, these promises are true. I have had to have done something wrong. This book is not wrong. My application may be. And I started from there, and my life has just been great. Not without problems. The thing I love about sobriety is I can have a lot of problems in life, but it doesn't have to upset me. It doesn't have to rule my day. Does my heart get broken? Sure. How can you see some of the things that go on in the world and not shed a tear? But I don't carry it with me all day, and I don't worry about it all day. And I've learned that in Alcoholics Anonymous. Some years back, I was at a Christian retreat, and I had a spiritual awakening at 23 years sober. And God talked to me, and my heart's been changed from that moment to this. Those of you who know what that means, know what that means. Those of you who don't, there's no way to explain it. Except I have been a different person from that night to this. And I have remained a faithful member of Alcoholics Anonymous, because this is where I found God. This is where I found the basic instruction and direction. And I love my God with all my heart, my mind, and my soul today, to the best of my ability. And I wouldn't change that. I'd make no apologies for my faith. You know, it's funny, in AA and Al-Anon, we always say, oh, any higher power is welcome here. You can have a rock, you can have a chair, you can have a tree, you can have a sponsor or a group. Just don't bring up Jesus, okay? Anybody else is okay, but we're not hypocrites. Isn't that amazing? And so I talk about my faith freely, not to convert anybody, but just, that's the right you gave me. Coming in these doors, I can have a God of my very own. And if it's a chair, if it's marble, if it's Christ, I'm allowed to say it. Or if it's Buddha, if it's Allah, or if it's a crystal. Good for you. I hope you're getting as much out of your faith as I am. And if you're getting more, I'd like to share that with you. Maybe you can teach me. Because it's the oneness and the inclusiveness of Alcoholics Anonymous and the welcoming of any and all faiths that I thrive in. Because there's so much to learn. I was with a guy a little while back. I don't have it. Anybody got a pen? Yeah. He was a guy, I was on a plane, and you know, I'm looking for gifts everywhere, and he gave me a gift. We were walking on the plane, and he is at the political spectrum the exact opposite I am. And it was so wonderful to have a great conversation with somebody. I don't know how it is up here, but politically in the States, everybody just spews every character defect they got when they're talking about it. And it was just sad. It's just sick. It's just sick. And this guy was the total, and we had a wonderful conversation. There were some honest differences, and we talked about maybe ways. And he pulled the pen out of his pocket, and this guy is a really powerful guy. He pulled his pen out of his pocket, and he said, you know, Ed, you see this pen? And I'm sitting next to him there. And he said, at the best you're going to see is half that pen. And the best I'm going to see is half that pen. And that's our perspective. What we always must remember is at least half the pen is unknown. Isn't that powerful? I just love that. Because so many times we think we know it all and it ain't working. No. At your best, you're just looking at half the pen. There's more to learn. And I really love that. And I get more pens like this. It's really wonderful. I'm going to wrap it up here. I know we started a little late, but I don't want to keep you late. They told me I had to go to seminary. And I thought, boy, I only got a 7th grade education, so I went over to the university and I said, I'd like to go to school. And they said, how many credits do you have? And I said, I have bad credits. Why? What's that got to do with anything? And they laughed like you laughed, and I shared with them a gift you gave me. I said, you don't understand. I got kicked out of school in 7th grade. I've always lived by my wits, and God gave me a very good mind, but I don't know if I'm smart enough to pass the class, but I'd like you to help me find out. Would you do that? And they were most gracious. And within 3 weeks, because I'd taken a GED test as a joke in California, I was able to go to school, and within 3 weeks I was a full-time student. And I went and I got their bachelor's degree, and then I went on to get my master's of divinity, that little 96-hour master's degree. It took me about 5-6 years. I didn't keep track. No need in keeping track when the end's what you're after. And I became ordained, and I did all that. Now I'm signing up. I'm going for my doctorate. And I don't say that to impress you. I just say that because I had told you for years in my head that education wasn't worth much. Well, to tell you the truth, I still pretty much feel that way, but it's required. They don't teach you a lot of new news there, but especially if you're working a program of recovery, especially spiritually. We have wonderful avenues. I'm going to end on this. I was doing a sermon on forgiveness. About halfway through the sermon, I stopped, and I said, I can't talk on forgiveness. You know, I've never told the guys who killed my father that I forgave them. And I stopped right there. And my congregation was 1,200 members at that time. And they kind of looked at me funny. As God would have it, 2.5 weeks later, one of the guy's sentences was overturned. And I'm well loved and well respected in my community because of how you taught me to behave and how I want to reflect God in my life, not just a passing mood. When his sentence got overturned, they said, release him or retry him. And the press came to me, and all the cameras were around and said, Reverend Mutum, what do you think? And I said, well, it's time to let him come home. Let's heal. Let's see if something good can come out of this after 30 years, 27 years. And a reporter friend of mine said, Ed, he said he's been in there since he was 17. He hasn't learned a career. He doesn't. Where's he going to live? How's he going to support himself? And I said, he can come live with me if he'd like. And people were taken back by that, but I'm not sure why. You welcomed me in here. What is the difference between him and I? Or you and him? You know? How many times did you almost kill somebody in a 3,500-pound bullet? How many times would it have been seconds and inches and you would have been behind bars for the rest of your life? I got a call from a guy. I was up in Wisconsin last week. And this guy said, I want you to talk to a guy I sponsor. His girlfriend was killed last year. And the guy's coming up for sentencing on Tuesday. Can he call you and talk to you? And I said, oh, absolutely. Well, I didn't realize the whole story till the guy told me. He was sponsoring the guy that killed his wife. So he had the guilt of, did I do something wrong as a sponsor? And should I have been there to protect my girlfriend? And the whole thing about questioning God. And he said, I need to know what to do. And I said, here's what I'm going to suggest you do. I'm going to suggest you go to that hearing and you go in the spirit of forgiveness. This baby's going to own you forever. And I said, oh, your therapist will love that. But if you want to be happy, joyous, and free, you can't let it own you. And he went, and the young man, 21 years old, was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And his sponsor cried because he felt bad for the kid. You know, who are we to judge anybody after some of the stuff we've done? Who are we to hate anybody? I mean, really. You know, I don't know about you, but I've got 2 or 3 things in my inventory. If I want to judge or be angry at somebody, I compare them to those 3 things. And I have said, if it's ever worse than those 3 things, I have the right to be annoyed. I never get past 1. Ever. Well, that story went all over the world. I got a call from Oprah. Her producers, 48 Hours, Dateline, NBC, they all called, how can you do this? How can I say, it's working step 8 and 9. See, if you're really working step 8 and 9, you know, they didn't get that at all. But that's what it is. You know, I've come to believe, and I'll talk about this more over the week, 8 and 9 has nothing to do with me. It has to do with repairing the damage I've done. It isn't all about me. It's about repairing the damage I've done. And that's exactly what I was doing there. 2.5 weeks later, I found myself walking down a cell into a prison I swore I'd never go in. And because my brother, all my youth, I was spent there visiting my brother. And I'm hearing my feet shuffle on the cement, and I'm praying. So God, let me be the best example and reflection of you I can be. And I walk into a cell, and I see a guy I hadn't seen in 27.5 years. Last time I saw him, we were in a courtroom. And I said, you give me 5 minutes with him. We don't need a trial. And I found myself sticking out my hand, telling him, Sherman, I just come here to tell you that I love you and I forgive you. And I believe God loves you and forgives you too. And I said, I only have one request for you. And he said, what? What's that? Because I'm kind of a big, imposing guy, and he didn't quite know what to do. And I said, if there's ever anything I can do to help you improve your life, allow me to do that. And he said, I don't understand. I should have been looking you up to ask you for your forgiveness. I said, Sherman, I'm not here about your accountability. I'm here about mine. And I just needed to tell you that I had forgiven you a long time ago, and I'd never told you. And that's only half an amend. If you don't tell the people. And the most amazing thing, I spent 2.5 hours there. And we ended up friends. We ended up saying the Lord's Prayer, and the jailer and the state's attorney general was there. Everybody, we were all in tears, and we all held hands and said the Lord's Prayer. And oddly enough, Sherman and I became friends. And I kept my promise. I went up, and when he was released from prison, the county attorney asked me what I thought, and I said, you need to reduce charges and let him come home. He said, Ed, all the other families are against it. And I said, I know that. I'm just telling you where my heart says, let him come home. And that's, God bless Bill Davis, the county attorney in Davenport, Iowa. He let Sherman come home, and they called me up, and I was allowed to go and pick him up. And I was allowed to bring him home, and he didn't do well the first time he was out. 30 years of maximum security prison. He kind of get moody, and he had a bad attitude, and if anybody said anything critical, he was right in their face, and he had to go back to prison. And then the next time he called me up, and he said, do you know any place I could stay? And I said, I made you a deal. You can come live with me. And I picked him up, and I brought him home. And I was able to get him a little apartment. I had a little apartment house at the time. We went out together and we found him jobs. And when they'd say why he was in prison, I'd stay there and explain to him, well, yeah, but you got to understand, this is the other side of that, and there's a healing going on there. And he got a lot of jobs. He just didn't have a real good work ethic. But you know the time I remember the most is when my friend Sherman was walking along the side of the road coming home from work. And when you spend 30 years in maximum security, you don't hear anything, not even birds, nothing except clangs. And I went and picked him up. He was walking alongside the road because I was running a little late to pick him up for work. And he got in my car and he was crying. And he said, I just got to go back to prison. I can't take all this noise. I can't take all this stuff coming up behind me. I just can't take it. And you taught me what to do then. I pulled over to the side of the road and I hugged him and I said, Sherman, it's going to be okay. He said, you're a miracle. I'm a miracle. And I don't use the word lightly. I said, if God can bring me where he brought me, he can bring you through this. And if you can't use your belief right now, believe in my belief. And I believe in you, and I will stand behind you. That's what I remember most about that whole thing. And I wouldn't change that for a minute, because that's what you've done to me. That's what the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous has done to me. Turned me into a person I always dreamed of being and didn't think I could. This weekend, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, we've decided to call it Searching for Spiritual Sobriety. And that's what we're going to talk about. And hopefully we'll have time to share. I want to do some private times with anybody that wants to. And we're going to talk about the steps. We're going to talk and share about one another. And a lot of healing is going to go on, if you're willing. Thank you very much. Good morning. For those of you who weren't here last night, my name's Ed Mutum and I'm an alcoholic. I still have an ornery streak in me. What I was going to do for those of you who came late because of the hockey game, I was going to, and I did, I'm losing by evil streak, it's just my ornery streak. But what I was going to do is program everybody to say, and you remember when I talked Friday night and gave you the secret to sobriety, and you go, oh. And the ones that weren't here would be going. But I don't do that anymore. I'm far beyond that. But I want to thank Don for being here. People tape all over the country, and so speakers don't have a real relationship with tapers. They just tape our talk, and a lot of people, they're making money off AA. Well, if you saw their expenses, believe me, you would have another idea about that. But there was a time, I've been taped so long, I remember when it was reel to reel. And every once in a while, tape would break and you hear and you'd stop. My favorite one, though, is when they went to cassettes and they didn't have auto reverse. The taper would stand right in front of you and go. And you'd stop and they'd turn over the tape, hit it, and go. And my ornery streak was that, too, I'd say. And that, my friends, is the secret to life and sobriety. And I could see him in the car go, what the heck? We just, But I really appreciate it. And there was a while I got really annoyed because there used to be, they'd ask permission because legally they're supposed to have my permission to do that. And here they do ask, by the way. And but they just, it seemed to me that we were being taken for granted and people were just taping us at their will. I was getting a little annoyed by it, to be quite honest with you. And in 1988, I moved back to Iowa after a series of bad breaks and misunderstandings financially. And I got back to Iowa and I'd just gone through a terrible divorce, just a nasty divorce. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I started getting calls, 5 right in a row. And I'd get on and nobody'd say anything. Well, my keen alcoholic mind told me who it was. And about the 5th time, I grabbed that phone and I said, who is this? And a little voice said, is this Ed M. that talks in AA? And I said, yeah, who's this? And she told me her name. And she said, I'm 5 years sober. I was sitting here with a gun in my lap and I just heard you talk. Can you talk to me? And I said, of course, honey, I'll talk to you. However long we need to talk, I'll talk to you. And from that moment to this, I celebrate what they do. Tape it, do it, give it away, whatever. Whatever. I'm just pleased. And, I tell that story from time to time, and last year in Melbourne, Florida, I was telling that story, and like I say, I tell it rarely. And in the reception line afterwards, a lady came up to me and said, Ed, I want to thank you for that night. I'm that woman. And, all that time later, 88 to 2005. So I support what they do, and they have a ministry, in my opinion, that literally saves lives. When I was here at Toronto at the International, some of you may not know it, but those name cards looked an awful lot like tape labels and CD labels. They had right here. And people would come by and they'd talk to my badge. They'd go, "You're Ed M. You're from, I've heard your tape." And they'd be talking right here, and I'd be looking. Butch from Barrie was sitting right here cracking up. They'd be talking away to my badge, boy. "You really helped me. It's really nice meeting you." So it does do wonderful things, and it does do, and not that I am a wonderful thing, but the spirit of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, and in my opinion, the spirit of God, carries through the help that's needed in those tapes. I know what I was before I came here, and I was absolutely nothing, because I didn't know how to be anything but that. This morning we're going to talk about, and throughout the day, we're going to talk about spiritual maturity and emotional maturity through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, or the 12 steps, however you want to look at it. I'm going to make a suggestion to you, though. How many here are brand new to recovery within the first year? Raise your hand. Okay, very good. How many are over 5 years? Okay, very good. Those of you newly sober within the first 5 years, you really need to concentrate on alcohol and whatever else you were doing. And I kind of direct it to everybody, because I believe it's important information, because I never got the information. That step 1 is about every area of my life. It says alcohol, but the longer you're sober, if you're like me, it really needs to be any area of your life. I said it last night, and I will say it again, that whatever area of your life you're not applying this program, it's going to kill you sooner or later. I cannot tell you the number of funerals I've gone to of good AA members, good Al-Anon members that didn't get it's a life thing, not a situation thing. And I buried them. Gambling, sex, pornography, stealing. I promise you this, that the disease is alive and well unless you're addressing every area of your life. And if you have a disease like I have a disease, and I believe what the book calls it, a spiritual disease, that's the only time disease is mentioned in the big book. It's referred to as a spiritual disease. They also say something in the big books that's just fascinating. There's a little sentence in there, I'll let you find it. It says, when the spiritual malady is addressed, the mental and physical take care of themselves. Now wait a minute. This is saying if I address the spiritual first, everything else will work out. I did it just the opposite. I thought, well, when I get to feeling a little better, when my head clears up, I'll talk about that God stuff. And it says in there just the opposite. And a lot of us don't even want to look at the God situation, because we've been our own little God, and we don't know if we want to give it up yet. Now, what do I mean by that? Oh, I know better. How do we say that? We say it in so many different ways. Oh, you don't understand. My case is different.
That's a famous.
That's right. Clancy says it best. He said, if there's ever a flag for Alcoholics Anonymous, it should simply be a flag that says, but you don't understand. My case is different. All of us, isn't it funny? All of us think we're so terminally unique, and the truth is we are. But the problem is we all look at it in the wrong way. That somehow this can apply. Step 1 can apply. After all, what is powerless? That doesn't mean I'll be able to control it. It means you're powerless. You ever been in a power outage? Powerless. You can wish light on all day long. You can be mad and indignant about it. And you're still going to be powerless. Isn't it the same with our lives and our addiction? I use a Bible that I enjoy, and believe me, I'm not trying to convert anybody, but this book, the Life Recovery Bible, is one of the best 12-step. It's got the steps and meditations all through it, and the Serenity Prayer, Step 10 meditation. All the notes at the bottom are footnotes to recovery, and it's generic recovery. Their first step, which I'm going to use this morning, is we're powerless over our life situations, and our lives have become unmanageable. Now, what does that mean? It means everything. You know that person you just can't stand at work? You're powerless. And if you're spending a lot of time hating them, your life is unmanageable. It means on the freeway, when you're telling that person they're number one, or they're telling you you're number one, powerless. How about breathing? How much power you got over that? We think we're so powerful and so mighty. Who keeps your heart beating? Who started you breathing? Going to keep you breathing till you stop? We're powerless over that too, aren't we? To a good degree. Powerless means have no effective response. Out of our control. How many of us said, oh yeah, I want to get sober, but geez, a meeting every day? Sounds like a little extreme to me. You know? Is that admitting powerless? No. That's admitting there might be a little problem. Might be a little problem, but I can take care of it. Trust me, I can take care of it. You know? Going to get help? Don't need to. Don't need to. No, a lot of people just don't understand the way I operate. I operate a little differently than others, you know. And here's my favorite one. You know, I've been blessed with a brilliant mind. People can't appreciate my creativeness. No, they call it insanity. That's what they call it. And once I get sober, guess what? I found my brilliance and my genius, just as you will. But what I found before was insanity. And the insanity was I could control everything, and I'll do it as I see fit. Step one for me is the finest ideas I could come up with made me a miserable failure every single time, especially where drinking was concerned. Other areas there was mild success, but even that mild success had to be affected by the failure. My best thinking got me drunk time and time again, got me crazy, sober time and time again, got me hating time and time again. And my life was unmanageable. What do I mean unmanageable? It means simply that. It means simply that there are simple things we can do, like we can set an alarm to get up. But what do you do if there's a power outage again? You're probably going to oversleep, unless, like me, I wake up with or without alarm clock, thank you God. But I still set my alarm clock just in case. Just in case. Unmanageable. How long have we spent trying to manage? How long have we spent trying to control? How long have we said, you know, my life would be okay if it wasn't for them? Talk about unmanageability, huh? Them. How about my emotions? How about my emotions? I used to think when I was new, wouldn't it be something if we had a PA system hooked directly to our mind? Your every thought is just right out there? There was a time when that idea would have terrified me. I wouldn't mind it now. Because I've changed my mind. Because I've changed my mind. The mindset is the biggest problem I believe we have coming in here. I don't know of anybody that woke up one morning and said, God, it's a beautiful morning, sunshine, and think I'll join AA. Haven't met them. Or, you know, home life's just wonderful. Everybody's doing so well, think I'll take in one of those Al-Anon meetings. That ain't the way we get here. We get here beaten but not surrendered. Sometimes surrendered, but for the most part, Clancy has a great line. He says, we come to this program and we throw in the towel. And a day or two later, we reach in and pull the towel right back. And then we spend the rest of our sobriety tearing off little pieces and throwing that in to see if that was Is that a good analogy? What I'm asking you to do this weekend is forget the little pieces, throw in the towel. What have you got to lose by surrendering to the fact that you're powerless and your life is unmanageable? I'll tell you a few things you got to lose. Anxiety, depression, and anger. Loneliness, sadness, irritability, discontent. To the extent I understand and live and apply step one is to the extent of those other things. The more I do it, the less of those I have. To the point of not having them at all for a long, long time. And then when they come, they're just like birds flying by. My friend Sandy B. he's a great member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love his sharings because he's an inspiration to me. And he says, we go through life and thoughts go by. He said, we'll grab a thought. Got one. And it's a bad thought. Now that's where he stopped. Here's where I take over. And I said, oh my God, look what I was thinking. How could I think that? God, I'm sober. Look. Then what else do? I go to him and say, look. Listen. Look, no, for 3 days now, look. Oh God, how can I do that? And what Sandy says is, if you got a bad idea, put it back and grab a good one. How often on step one are we going, grab a good one? I'm here to tell you, that's the basis of spirituality. It's no big mystery to me anymore. If I'm having a bad thought, replace it with a good one. Put it back and grab a good one. That's all I have to do. And that's what I got to do with step one. Not only step one, but every step. And I don't know about you, but the longer I'm sober, the more those steps expose themselves. When the first time I read the Big Book, God wasn't mentioned once. And over the years, the Big Book fairy has come in and put him in about every sentence and paragraph. First time I read it, it wasn't mentioned. You know why? Wasn't going to look. Wasn't going to look. I always get chuckles when I hear a new person talking about reality. Really. Because 9 out of 10 times they have no idea of what reality is. They have a great idea of what their perceptions are. And step one to me says, stop, surrender it all. Let's start again. And if I might be so bold, die of self, begin again. Or, bolder yet, be reborn. Let's start fresh. No matter where you've been, no matter how far you've been, no matter how far down, up, or start fresh. So if we look at step one and we really say, even at my best, I probably could do better, and surrender it all. I always get tickled when somebody says to me, well, I've had some old behaviors come up. And I say, if you're still doing them, it's not old behavior. It's called current behavior. So what that is? It's just a little rationalization to pass it off and keep doing it. Pass it off and keep doing it. Oh, step one, I don't know about that. Well, you know what? If you don't, you're in real trouble. You're in real trouble. If you've been one of them fortunate enough to come and just glide through and go into meetings and a little activity, and the fellowship is wonderful, but the steps in God are what's going to keep you sober. The steps in God are what's going to give you a life that you wouldn't trade with anybody. See, I was fortunate because when I got here, I pretty much felt that I would rather be anybody else, any other place, and live any other time than right now. And through the process of these steps and living it as a way of life, that's gone 180 degrees. I don't know of anybody I'd trade lives with, and I know some wonderful people. But I also know what I've been given, you know. And it starts with step one, powerless. My life is unmanageable. And you know something? I've been through all our literature several times, and it never says at any given point, okay, you can manage it now. I assume that you can, because after all, I did step one. I assume that I can manage it again, but the minute I do, guess what? I'm going backwards. I'm not going forwards. And all of these steps, I believe, are spiritual exercises. People come to me a lot and they say, you know, Ed, something bad happened and I was just surprised at how weak I was spiritually. And I would say to them, well, what spiritual exercises are you doing every day? They went, well, I pray from time to time. I said, well, why are you surprised you're weak when you're not doing any spiritual exercises? You don't do any physical exercises, guess what? You get weak. Don't expect to run a marathon. So it's very important that we take these spiritual exercises, including step one, and in my opinion, every day. They're applicable. I'm always fascinated when somebody comes to talk to me, and I say, well, what step are you on? And inevitably, if they're in deep trouble, they'll be going, well, I'm kind of doing, let's see, maybe 10 and a little 3. I said, otherwise, you're on no step. He said, well, I've been through the steps. And I said, where does it say that? Where does it say that, you take this for 10 days and your disease will be gone? Take this for 12 steps, your disease will be gone. What it says to me is it's a way of life that has to be practiced daily. So what I tell those people is, you got to get a program. You got to start working one rather than thinking one. Because your thinking isn't doing well. And what step are you on? If you've been around a while, got a great idea. 12 months, 12 steps. What if you took a step a month and just applied that in your life consciously and not taking it for granted, well, I did that. Oh, I've done that. Really. It's not about doing that. It's about living that. And until we make that distinction, I can tell you what happens from my own experience. The same emotions, depressions, and anxieties that came to you in your drinking days will come to you in your sober days. The psychic change has not taken place if I'm not doing the steps. If I do the steps, it guarantees me a psychic change. What does that mean? Change my mind. Change my mind. But through these steps, I can find the freedom that I've never known, and they have to be pertinent. Everybody says, well, this is my favorite step, this is my favorite step. They're all my favorite steps. Because to my mind and to my way of life, they are all imperative to my recovery. None is less important than the other. In fact, I will say this to you. The one you think is less important is probably the one you should be working. At least in my experience. Then, right after that, we surrender. And we start talking about being powerless. God, don't we love that? And we got to surrender and we got to start fresh. Oh, there's a good thought, Let's just throw away everything I've ever done in life. Well, for some of us, it's a refreshing idea. But now, what are they going? They're going to talk about you being crazy. It says came to believe. Now, notice it said came to believe. I'm going to challenge you this weekend on your belief. As some of you know, I told you I'm a pastor last night, and it's so funny when people come up to me and say, Ed, I've been a good Christian all my life, and I just believe in Jesus, and my son, I'm just worried sick about him. How does that work? I'll say, what do you mean? So you're a good Christian and you believe in Jesus. That means you have faith. Yeah. Have you prayed about it? So, why are you worrying? If you pray, why worry? If you worry, why pray? Because we need to keep control. That's why. People of faith can turn it over and go on about their business. So I'm asking you, when it says in step 2, came to believe, where are you coming from? Where are you going to? Where are you at in your journey really? It's so easy to say, oh yeah, I kind of believe there's a God. And then there's others that profess faith to no end, and you see them breaking every rule they can break. Of course, my answer to that is, thank God they're going to church. At least they got a fighting chance. They're not sitting in some other room gossiping about them. But it's true. Oftentimes I'll have people come into the church, and when I was at a regular church, and people would come in and they say, I thought the walls were going to come tumbling down when I walked in. I said, oh, no, they got much stronger when you walked in. It's just the way we look at things. Just the way we look at things. Came to believe in a power greater than ourselves. I am so pleased that it didn't say God at this point, because I would have had to leave. Thank you very much. I told you last night about my ones. My evidence that God was nothing but a jerk out to get me. And when you told me to pray, I said, please. That's radar, baby, and he'll pick me up and zap me. I know it. I ain't praying. Those are all the images I had, so I'm so grateful they said power greater than yourself. Because I had to start where I was at. God, I would have loved to have been where you were. But I had to start where I was at. My talk last night, I told you how I made a mistake. I started out right. I said a God that I could come to believe in is a God that's kind and loving and forgiving. Oh man, that's good stuff. I like that. Because that's 180 degrees from anything I'd ever believed about God. But then the mistake I made, I went beyond my own belief and experience and started using your words and your terms and forgetting my journey. As it says so eloquently in the book, this is a book and a program designed to help you develop a personal relationship with God that will solve your problems. Or problem, it says. Problems to me. So at step 2, when we came to believe in a power greater than yourself, make sure that's what it is. And if you're new and if you think it's the group, okay. If you think it's your sponsor, okay. I hear people say, they think their sponsor's a rock. I say, you know what? They're probably being more honest about their God than you are. Because you're pretending like you got one. You ain't got squat. So it's important that when I come to believe, what is the power greater than myself? Because this is the cornerstone of all other things that I'm building. This is the cornerstone, and if I misplace it and if I get it in crooked, there's problems later in the structure, I promise you. The nice thing is we can always go back. The wonderful thing about the 12-step program is we can always start at step 1 again. And by the way, you don't have to drink to do it. You don't have to get divorced to do it. You don't have to choke somebody to do it. You can just say, you know what? I am not comfortable at all, and 12 steps tell me I'm supposed to be happy, joyous, and free. I'm starting fresh and getting it right. I would suggest you do that with the sponsor's direction. Here's why. Especially if you're on your step 3. Step 4 may look a little too weary to get into. So maybe I need to go back to step 1. No, you probably need to go on to step 4. But that's why sponsorship is so important. But when we talk about a power greater than yourself, what is it? I mean, what do you really believe? If I had a gun to your head and a lie detector hooked to you, and I said, your life depends on what you believe, what would you say? That's the truth. Whatever that is, celebrate it. Even if it's, I got no damned idea. Excellent, good. Now we got a starting spot. Now we can move ahead. But until I acknowledge where I'm at, I can't grow anywhere else. You know, they used to say years ago in the 70s and 80s, grow where you're planted. It was really profound. Because that's the only way your relationship with God or a power greater than yourself. And for me, for a long time, it was a power greater than yourself, because to say God would put a knot in my gut. And, you know, for a long time, it was higher power. Now it's Hewlett-Packard, you know, but back then it was, I always get a kick when I see their commercials. But eventually I was comfortable enough to take the abbreviation away and just call God, God. But I'm grateful for every step of that journey I took. You know why? It's mine now. You can't tell me what I think. You can't tell me what I feel as far as my God's concerned. You can share with me some things you've been through and maybe improve my relationship, but you can't destroy my relationship because it's my relationship. And if we don't take time to build that relationship going in, our sobriety is going to be askew at best. And you're going to have that sense of, I'm missing something here. I'm missing something here.
Usually what it is the relationship with God. Now, it's very easy to do because in this day and age, I've gone to meetings where God isn't even mentioned. Issues and boundaries, all that other stuff's mentioned. None of which is in our 12 steps. It's in the other 12 steps, not in our 12 steps. Has nothing to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, I almost believe that a lot of people's higher power is their therapist anymore. I sit in meetings and hear people say, I couldn't live without my therapist. To me, that's just as bad as saying, I couldn't live without my pastor. Really? Then you got another sick dependency going on. You better look at it. You better look at it. We got to be, when in thinking about who is my higher power, is it helpful, is it not helpful? There again, I'm not saying anything derogatory about therapists. Therapy has helped a lot of people and continues to help a lot of people in AA. The problem is when those individuals put more on the therapist than they even want. And they become their reason for breathing, and they're going to be their third step next Thursday at 2 o'clock. That's when it gets to be a problem. And it doesn't get to be a problem with them because if you blow your brains out, they probably don't even do a follow-up. They're too busy. Doctors and therapists have lines of people saying, what about me? What about me? What about me? I have yet to meet a doctor or a therapist who does any follow-up, especially on alcoholics that they put on medication. Once you quit calling for appointments, you don't exist anymore. So they have no idea of the reality of what's going on. So I'm going to say to you that when you talk about a power greater than yourself, make sure it's something that's healthy, something that's freeing, something that doesn't make you dependent. My first higher power was Big John. Big John used to pick me up and take me to meetings. And not that I was afraid of Big John, because he wasn't that big. He was only like 6'3", 6'4". I love these guys, these 6'1" guys, 200 pounds, wearing big dog t-shirts. I say, you're a pup. You ain't even a dog. Take that shirt off. But Big John, why was he a power greater than myself? He'd magically appear at my door and take me to meetings. And when he'd drive home, we'd sit, John, I told you his size, you see my size. We would sit in his 1962 two-door Corvair Monza and talk. Now, John, what do you think? But he was wonderful to me because he was showing me how to do things I had no idea how to do. I remember one time we walked out of a meeting, somebody said something bad to John, so I kicked in their window and I jerked him out of the window. I threw him up against the tree. I was going to take him out. John said, no, Ed. And I said, well, he insulted you. He said, we don't do that in AA. I said, oh, okay. Made my amends and paid for the window. I don't know, But he was a power great. He would tell me and show me how to do things I had no comprehension on how to do. I had a comprehension on how to do it, but they were all wrong for the most part. Especially for me emotionally and spiritually. I had gathered all this negative information on how to live life and how to relate to people and how to believe in a God or not believe in a God. And that was evermost in my mind. So Big John, I came to believe in Big John. You know why? If he said 6:30, I'll pick you up. At 6:30, he's out there. No question. After my father was murdered, every morning at 7 o'clock when I left for work, you know where Big John was? Happened to be right outside my house, reading his paper, and I'd come out and he'd go. He made a believer out of me. What we say and what we do counts a great deal. I remember one time my sponsor, after Clancy became my sponsor, he said, well, Ed, do you want to go with me to talk someplace? Because he talks literally every night of the week, sometimes 2 and 3 times a day. And I said, sure. He said, be at my house at 6:30 p.m. I said, okay. I got there about 6:31 and I smelled exhaust fumes. And what was wrong? And I called in the next day. I said, hi, Clancy. I said, I was there. You were gone. He said, you weren't there at 6:30. I said, well, I was there at 6:31, 6:32. He said, that's what I said. I said 6:30, didn't I? And I went, oh, come on. He said, don't oh, come on me. If I was a newcomer waiting for you to take me to a meeting, that would have been enough to say, see, they don't even tell the truth. It's important what we say and do. When we say we're going to be someplace, do it. We are responsible, We're responsible for the reflection we send of this program. And if you're one of those who think that this is a social deal, God, I hope you get over that pretty quick. Otherwise you won't be around long anyway. What this is a way of life. What this is something that we commit to our innermost selves, to be the best people we can ever, beyond what I ever dreamed of being. Beyond. So John was my first power greater than myself. Then the group, because there was times when John couldn't be there. He was an undertaker, so he had business from time to time. He kept me sober for a long time. He used to say, how tall are you, Ed? And at that time I was 6'11", and I said, 6'11", why? He said, the standard coffin's only 6'3". I said, what do you mean by that? He said, oh, chop chop. It's that AA love in the early days that kept me here. He said, we either chop them off or we break them and fold them in. And I thought, oh, God, I don't want to be walking around heaven like that if I get there. Oh, hell, for that matter, a little closer to the flame, But John, I came to believe in John, and then I came to believe in the group, because when John wasn't there, you know what? Holiday, no holiday, rain, snow, somebody was always there. Always there. In the last 10 years, I started hearing about people that don't have meetings because of bad weather. Really? How long would that keep you from drinking? Or on a holiday because of family. You're like me, if it wasn't for AA, you wouldn't have a family. Is it really that bad to go give an hour back? And eventually I worked on a power greater than myself, because the next step demands that I know, because you know what it's asking you to do? Made a decision to turn our will and our life. Just take a minute and think about that. Will and our life. What more is there? How many of you have done it? How many of you have said you've done it? You bet. Will and life. That's everything that we are about. Everything that we live. The job. The co-workers. A lot of people say to me, the toughest place to work this program's at home. That's a load of crap. It's the last place you ever attempt it. That's the problem. We're too busy trying to impress the people in meetings. Oh, living a day at a time. Everything's good. Yeah. We go home and kick the dog and cuss out the wife or the husband and be the same jerk we've always been. No. It's not the toughest place. It's just the last place, unfortunately. Have you turned that over to God? Your home life, your situations. It's asking you to turn everything over. Even your emotions, your will, and what you think. Everything. I'm going to read you something that fascinated me a while back. My home group's a big book study group. We meet every night, every Tuesday night in Davenport, Iowa at 6 to 7 p.m. And I would invite you there, but I like the group small, so... But if you're ever there, come on by. It'd be good to see you. And we go through the first 164 pages, but we also include the forwards in the doctor's opinion. And it only took us 4 years and 4 months to get through it the first time. You know why? There's far too much information here. This isn't Bill Wilson's brilliance that's in this book. It's God hand feeding us everything we'd ever need, in my opinion. To this day, when I read it, it tells me something new. I'm not a big-time big book quoter, simply because by the time I got to quote it, it's old news. If I think I need to quote that, I'll get your number, go back and read it, see if it says the same thing. Promise you it won't, and then I'll share that with you. But I'm always sharing yesterday's recovery. It's like you can't stay sober on who you helped yesterday. You can't stay sober on the prayers you said yesterday. Just can't. But on page 62 of the big book is just profound to me. It says, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our problems. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation. But invariably we find at some point in the past we have made decisions based on self that have later put us in the position to be hurt. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. I'll read that again. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. The alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. I'm sure many of you have read this, and later it says this is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God is to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father. We are his children. Most ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone from which new and triumphant arc through which we pass to freedom. I love this one. When we sincerely, underline, sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer, being all-powerful. Doesn't say having little power. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed, but there's an if. If we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such footing, we became less and less interested in our lives, ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. That's the big book. Now I read all that to read you the next sentence. We were now at step 3. That's all work to be done in 2. The understanding, the selfishness, self-centeredness. That's the only way you can be ready for 3 is if you get rid of that selfish self-centeredness. And if you understand that we're the root of the problems. How can you turn your will and your life over to the care of God if you don't understand these basics? What you're doing is what a lot of us did. Give him enough to satisfy him for a little while. Are you praying? Yeah, I'm praying. What are you praying? I pray he gets exactly what he deserves. That's what I'm praying, you know. When we talk about step 3, they are dead serious. And I will ask you, how have you done on step 2? How have you done on preparation of step 3? Now, the saving grace is most of us have a good excuse. We were new, and when I was new, they used to have a great line that I loved. They said, you know what? Wait for 90 days to get your brains out of hock. You know, for the fog to lift. God, what great information. Now they ship you out of treatment centers and say stupid things like, you know, now that you've been through treatment, you got the equivalent of 2 to 3 years in A&A. Oh, they tell them that. What a lie. You know how you get 2 to 3 equivalent years of AA? About 2 to 3 years in AA. That's how you get that. So in 30 days, they're thinking, I've done 1 through 5. And we can't hold them accountable. But what we can do is when they come into these rooms, we can take them through the book and take them through the steps and show them what's really there. See, people can't charge for AA. That's why all the other therapies had to be brought in. I don't know about up here, but down in Iowa, in treatment, they are not allowed anymore to mention AA or God. Oh, it's coming if it isn't here. In fact, I know it's here. But it's coming. Because we're no longer helpful to the experts. And last night I said something about the professionals. And a lady came up to me who is a professional, and I'm glad she did. She does a lot of good work. Please understand that I paint that with a broad brush simply because it's been my experience that that's what's applicable. But there are individuals in every profession that understand alcoholism and addiction and this disease that we're dealing with, this spiritual disease that we're dealing with. But most of them don't. Now in the medical universities, they're back down to giving the same education they gave 40 years ago on alcoholism, 1 to 2 hours, that's it. And what they're taught to do is dual diagnose so the insurance companies will pay them. That's the truth. That's just the truth. Change happened about 15 years ago. I watched it happen. I watched a hospital that was totally chemically free. When an insurance company, major insurance company, said we'll no longer pay just for addiction, there has to be another diagnosable condition. At that time, they had an AA meeting every Saturday night where over 300 people attended. They have no meeting anymore. There isn't enough for a meeting anymore. Because they started dual diagnosing and saying, no, this won't hurt you. Yeah, we know last month we told you it would. This month we're telling you, no, it won't. And it does. What do I mean by that? I mean that in order for me to grow spiritually, I have to be in touch with what's going on. If I'm going to work step 2 and be restored to sanity, I need to be restored to sanity, not mask over and I'll deal with it later. You know? In certain cases, mood alters are needed. There's just no question about that. And please understand, I'm not talking about your heart medication. I'm not talking about your blood pressure medication. I'm not talking about your epilepsy unless your epilepsy was diagnosed before you got sober. You might be surprised now if you go to the doctor and get reevaluated and get off that, maybe you don't need it anymore. Chances are you don't. But that's between you and your doctor. You go and you talk to your doctor about that. And any form of medication that you might be on, don't make the brilliant move of I'm just going to quit it. That's crazy. Especially if you've been on it for a while. What you might do is go to your doctor and you say, you know, I really want to try to get more depth in this. Would like you to wean me off this. You know, you can always go back on and just see. Now some people say to me, well, what if they get suicidal? In 35 years I've been around, I've met a high estimate of 7 people who've committed suicide while they're trying to stay sober. I cannot count the number of people I've been buried that took the other way. Can't count them. Can't count them. And as a pastor, when you're sitting there doing the service, you just want to scream one more time because they convinced them, oh, this won't hurt you. They don't know what they're talking about. We're the experts. We do know what we're talking about. They aren't the experts. This is the program that started changing the world of addiction. And it's the program that continues to, if that program's applied. There again, when we're into step 3, it doesn't say turn my will and my life over to the care of God and Prozac. It says over to the care of God. The care of God. And some people rush, well, it's just the care. It means I still got to do it. I don't think so. I think when I turn my will in my life, I surrender it all. One day at a time, thank God. One day at a time, thank God. Just for today, surrender it all. See what happens. First time you try that, you know what's going to happen. You're going to be a nervous wreck all day. Well, what if he isn't paying attention? You know, what if I love the people who say, you know, I went to a meeting today and God's testing me. That's right. He stops the entire world just to screw around with your day. That's right. Now, you're just that important. Yeah, you really are. No, life tests me. Life tests me all the time. My old ideas test me all the time. But my God never tests me. But He watches I'm being tested. And He's given me a way out. I can either do it or not. The choice is mine. The choice is mine. Now, when you talk about step 3 and you talk about God, man, sour spoon. When you talk about God, what I want you to do is take a minute and throw away any old ideas that you have. A lot of you have pads, and those of you who don't, I want you just to take a minute and I want you to create a God that you can believe in. There again, gun held to your head, lie detector. Do you believe this? Your life depends on it. Write down on your pad some of the characteristics of a God that you could really believe in this moment. Or make a mental list. Take a minute, close your eyes and do that. It's important work. And there's no right or wrong size of list. There isn't any correct number or incorrect number. This is your list. Could just be one word. And it's not a test. There's no pass or fail. It's your word. It's your concept. Okay, anybody want to share something they wrote down? Just a little piece of it? Oh, don't all jump forward.
I will. I put kind, gentle, forgiving, loving, and compassion.
Okay, very good. Anybody else?
Loving, caring, forgiving, accepting, all-knowing, and understanding.
Good. Anybody else?
Merciful, forgiving.
Okay.
Plugged in.
Plugs in. Very good. I like that, yeah. Any else? Not that I like them all. Anybody else? Come on.
Benevolent.
Benevolent? Good.
My God loves the Saskatchewan Rough Riders.
Thank God it says you understand them. No, but if that's your God, hope it's a winning season. But anybody else?
My God, sober.
Sober, okay.
Funny.
Funny, very important. Man, if we can't learn to laugh at ourselves, forget it. If you take your program so seriously you can't laugh, then you've got a new God and it has nothing to do with anybody outside of you. Have you noticed we got a room of people here that probably at one time didn't believe much at all, and all that was said was positive comments. I'm going to share something with you that I absolutely believe with every fiber of my being. There was a wonderful man around years ago named Chuck C. And Chuck was my mentor. He used to sit, and Chuck taught me about God by the way he lived. Oh, he taught me wonderful things by what he said, but I watched him. And one of the things he used to say to me is, Eddie, what you came here looking for, you're looking with. What you came here looking for, you're looking with. And what does that mean? What it means is everything I ever wanted to be, I already am. And these steps are a way to bring it out. The way I lived life brought out the worst in me. The way I've learned to live life brings out the best in me. And you know, we always hear, well, when you point a finger at somebody else, there's three pointing back at you. Have you heard that one? Do you know that's about the good stuff too? We always take it in a negative connotation. It's about the good stuff. If you see something that really moves you and lifts you and just touches your soul and you say, oh, I wish I could be that way, you are, or you couldn't have identified it. What you came here looking for, you're looking with. Everything you ever wanted to be, you are. The difference is the actions we take and the way we think. About faith, about God, about life, about everything. Those of you who wrote down your God, next time you pray, I challenge you to bring that image to mind. Connect with that God that you understand. And don't put any boundaries on it. Let it grow. Let it lift. See where it goes. But for some of you, I'm sure for the first time in your life, you're on solid ground with the power greater than yourself. And you know, the nice thing about step 3 too is you can take it any time you want to take it. I don't know that you can take it enough. And each time you take it, you're going to grow. And each time you take it, you're going to learn a new sense of healing and a sense of being. At least that's been my experience. Step 3 in the break, I challenge some of you to go for a walk and do 2 things. Stop hating yourself. It hasn't worked even before you got sober. And even start to consider the possibility of taking your own hate and self-loathing and giving that to God too. That's my challenge for break. Are we at break time? We got 4 more minutes, but I'm going to give you 4 extra. Thank you very much. I meant to tell you earlier that at any time, we're going to have a question and answer period at the end of all this in the closing sessions. But if you come up with a question before then that's really burning, like I love somebody came up to me at halftime, at break, and said, I agreed with some of what you said, and I strongly disagreed with other parts that you said. And I love that. Because it's not about me being right. It's about just putting it out there and stirring it up and seeing where you stand. So if there's any time that's something that really bothers you, instead of going into a corner and taking my inventory, which you're more than welcome to do, because God knows my sponsor does, maybe talk about it here. So if you have a question that comes up, don't hesitate if you're not embarrassed to talk about it, because it is being taped, and we will hold you up for blackmail. But if you have a question, ask it. We'd be happy to answer. Also, tonight we're going to have our service, our little get-together, we'll call it a service of joy, right down there in the chapel, and there will be a normal Mass being given across the way at 5 o'clock, okay? So for those of you who wanted to go to Mass, that'll be across the way, and at the same time we're going to be down here and we're going to have a little service that I just kind of do and put together, and it's fun and it's loving, and anybody's welcome. You don't even have to believe. How's that? Yeah, isn't that great? So step 3, powerful step. And it's funny because when we said the third step prayer, I heard a couple people say amen, and it doesn't say amen in the book. In fact, amen is until after the 7th step prayer. I've heard it said that you could consider from 63 all the way to 76 one solid prayer with the end amen. And that's pretty good stuff. That's pretty good stuff. And I'll tell you why. It says some powerful things. I hate being read to, that's why I'll read you. But no, I just want to read this one part that when we're talking about an inventory, it's so important to me. It says, next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, not thought. Vigorous action, and the first step was a personal house cleaning, of which we're going to be talking about 4, of which many of us had never attempted. We're not talking about the same thing as confession in the Catholic Church. We're not talking about the same thing. If that had worked for you then, you'd be in better shape. We're talking about a house cleaning at depth. And when it talks about resentment is the number 1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stems all forms of, and I told you it was in here before, spiritual disease. For we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we will straighten out mentally and physically. How important is step 4? I would say to you, absolutely critical in this person's recovery. Now, what was tough was they said, made a fearless and searching moral inventory. You know what my first question was? Whose morals, yours or mine? Because if they were by my morals, I really didn't need to take one, thank you very much. But if they were by your morals or the moral standing that was set, the difference between right and wrong, which everybody knows, except a few people who are incapable of knowing, of course it was by the morals that were set out there. And I didn't like that information at all, because I was not a nice person. And there's a set of columns that you do in the big book, and it's laid out wonderfully, and it's very good. I've taken the 4th step that way. I'm a guy that takes a good 4th and 5th step about every 5 years. Now, I know some people, you were perfect and did it all back then. My hair's off to you. I'm one of those guys. I'm one of those guys that I can't do a perfect step 10, and things slip between the cracks. And it's funny how it seems to be the same things will slip through those cracks. And you get a little pile at the end of 3 or 4 or 5 years. So I go and I clean up the pile. So whether you do or you don't, my recommendation is, especially if you've got some time sober, and if you've been a long time and you're still critical and grouchy and taking everybody's inventory, my suggestion is you've never taken a good one to begin with. I always run into I've been sober 20 years, I haven't taken an inventory. Yeah, I can tell. And if you want what they have, good. Okay, go for it. I'm not here to judge them. I just don't want that kind of action at 20 years sober. Just don't want that. So I had to take an inventory. And I don't know about you, in my inventory, it wasn't the big things that you probably should have thought were in there. It was the little nickel and dime compromises in my life, before I got sober and after I got sober, that were killing me. And we all have that deep, dark secret that nobody's going to, and never going to tell this one. I'm going to share mine with you. And you're probably going to think, that's nothing. Doesn't matter what you think. It matters what it was doing to my heart and soul. When I was, 13, 14, somewhere in there, there was a record out, Little Eva in Motown. Little Eva and the Locomotion. Come on, baby, do the locomotion. Remember that? Yeah. Some of you do. Some of you are going, huh? What? But it was a great song, and my buddy Ron and I would play that record over and over on that 45 RPM. We just started, just played all day long. And one day I stole the record. I didn't even have a record player. I stole the record. The next day I went over to Ron's and he said, I can't find the record, Ed. And I went, I wonder where it's at. Now that may sound silly to you, but that bothered me worse than beating people half to death sober. That bothered me worse than the broken heart I put on my mother's face. For whatever reason, I was never going to tell that to anybody ever. See, in that case, I don't care what you think should bother me or not bother me. It's what bothers me. It's a fearless moral inventory of the exact nature of my wrongs. Now, I'm aware in Al-Anon they shifted a few years ago and now they put good things in the inventory. That's fine. I don't believe in that. I believe it defeats every purpose of the fourth step, because the fourth step is to level our ego. Other people put themselves on their inventory. I don't recommend that. In step 10, it talks about putting assets. Step 4, it doesn't talk about that. And people who are self-involved go, oh, but I think so badly of myself. Not nearly of what you should think. Let's get down to the real nitty-gritty of what kind of rotten persons we've really become. Because until we do that, we're never going to get better. I don't know about you, but I'd love to justify my actions. Oh, I did this, this, and this, but I did this, this, and this. And I'd never look at what I did. I'd never look at the kind of damage and hell I put people through. So in my inventory, it was my inventory. It wasn't their inventory. And that's very important to me. I've done the fourth step in many different ways. My sponsor gave me 7 questions 30 years ago that are just very effective. And that's what I use for the people I sponsor, because it gets right down to the quick. Well, first question is, what memories in your life cause you pain, guilt, and sadness? Hello, there's a... And when you're done, you know what? Those are supposed to be gone. If they're not, then you've missed something in the process. If you have done this inventory, and if you've done 5, 6, 7, and 8, and still carry it, you've missed something in the process. There is something you're unwilling to let go of. Part of what was in my inventory is I loved pain and discomfort. It was familiar. I knew how to be at dis-ease. I had no idea how to be at peace. If you brought peace along, I'd bring disease into it, dis-ease into it, so I'd feel comfortable. How many of us did that once we got sober? You know, things are going well, so we start thinking of things that stirred up. Yeah, well, what if? Clancy always used to say, we had a sheriff in Los Angeles, Sheriff Peter Pitches, and he said, somebody told me to turn my bad checks over to God. Turned them over to God, God turned them over to Sheriff Peter Pitches. And he came and arrested me, you know. So again, we got to do action. It can't just be a thought process. And I've got to put the things in there that I've done wrong. And I'm not trying to be the worst, because there isn't any worst and there isn't any best. But I couldn't think of anybody I hadn't offended in some way, just by my presence. Because I was sarcastic, I was arrogant, I was self-involved, I was all that stuff. So my inventory, the first time I wrote that inventory, it was kind of all what you had done to me. Next time I took that inventory was about what I had done to others. And that was very powerful and very healing for me. because I had always blamed you for all of my troubles. If it wasn't for you, then I wouldn't have done this. If it wasn't for those cops harassing me, I wouldn't have fought them. Well, you know what? If I hadn't been in trouble, they wouldn't have had any reason to harass me. Those kind of things. And that inventory, especially anger and resentment, my God, those were part of my being. I think that's why a lot of us have trouble letting that go, because I used to think, if I let that go, what's going to happen? There's going to be a giant void. No, it's called peace. It's called lack of conflict. It isn't a void. But I always looked at it negatively. I've been that way all my life. And I've heard it this week. Well, I've done this all my life. What changed it? Quit justifying that you've done it all your life. Here, I've done this all my life. What do you think? Want to change it? No, rather not. Thank you. Eye swells from time to time. Other than that, I'm okay. You know. And the nice thing about it, you're more than welcome to keep doing it. Yeah. But if you want to get better, then you decide to do whatever it takes to change that. And I think part of the healing process of the fourth step is to look at it and to be able to change it. 50% of the problem is acknowledging what it is, you know. Really getting down to the nitty-gritty of what it is. The other part of this that's so important is who you take it with. But I'll get into that. I want to talk about anger for a minute. God, there's so much stuff about anger in that today. The book is very explicit about it. It says we can't afford it. It says it's the dubious luxury of normal men and women. For us, it's poison. It's kind of like reading the warning on the pack of cigarettes, huh? Yeah, for them, maybe. Yeah. That's our insanity. That's our insanity. And for years, I hung on to that anger. I really did. And I'd process it. I'd work through it. When it came, I'd breathe. And I'd work through my anger. And at times I'd vent my anger because that's what was needed. God forbid you were the one I was venting it on. It wasn't. And I heard all this stuff in meetings. None of it's found in there, however. None of it. But I heard it in meetings. And I want to share a couple instances when I was working on my anger and resentment. I was in Bowling Green, Kentucky, about 3 years ago. A guy come up to me and said, "Ed, how you doing?" And I said, "Oh, fine. How are you?" I said, "Good." He said, "You know, I used to go to meetings with you out in Los Angeles." I said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I remember the last time I was at a meeting with you." And I said, "Really? Why is that?" He said, "You knocked the guy out with one punch." I'm a spiritual guru. Shh. 15 years sober. I remember I had forgotten about it. Because when you do these steps, you heal. And I'm glad he brought it up, because I remember at that time I was working on my anger. Yeah, no one was going to upset me. I was going to breathe in, breathe out. I was going to control my anger. And there was a guy that was sitting in front of me talking during the meeting. And our group culture is no talking during the meeting. Have respect for who's ever out there. Don't go and get coffee. Do go at break. All that. That's this guy. And I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, "Excuse me, you're talking so I can't hear." And he said, "Oh, okay." And at coffee break out in California, all the meetings are an hour and a half, which I prefer. And you had a half hour and then 10-minute coffee break, and then you finished up with an hour. It was great. And at the coffee break, he stood up and he turned around and said, "Don't you ever touch me again." And I said, "Sir, you don't understand. I was just trying to help you. You see, in this meeting, we don't talk during the break." And little Alice, God bless her, knew me a lot better than I did. Come over and put both hands on my chest, said, "Big Ed, sit down. Big Ed, sit down." I said, "Oh, honey, don't worry about me. We're just talking. It's just fine." And Alice went, "Okay." Went and sat down. And we're talking again. Here's Alice again. Come back 5 minutes later. "Big Ed, sit down." And I said, "Oh, no, don't worry. I'm in control here. This is, you know." And I turned around and the guy said, "Don't you ever." And before I know it, pop. And he's going over 4 rows of chairs. And my first thought is, how am I going to explain this to my sponsor? That was my first thought. And I know what to do when you've been bad. I ran right around and woke him up and made amends immediately, you know. And I sponsored him for the next 5 years. He said he'd been around AA for some time, but nobody had ever gotten his attention before. Seems I did. Now, the reason I tell you that, and funny, but you know what? There's no reason to ever touch anybody physically in an AA meeting, and that had always been my safe place here. And I'm the one that violated it, with the exception of that guy the first few months I was sober. And there have been some people I had to physically take care of that were going to hurt themselves or somebody else in the meeting. That's the only exception, when there's a lot of illness and things need to be taken care of. But it just broke my heart that I did that. Shortly after that, I'm going out to the valley. I was living in California. I was going out to the valley to talk. And this guy in this Audi cuts me off and he tells me I'm number one. And then he slams on the brakes a couple times. And then he tells me I'm number one again. And then he does this. Pull over. I thought, excellent. There is a God. Excellent. And my rule is, if he gets out of the car, his butt's mine. Because he's coming at me. That's the rules in California. He got out of the car, and I thought, oh, good. I unreeled out of that car. His eyes got this big, and I grabbed him by his collar and his crotch, and I threw him over his car. And I thought, Ed, you're on your way to give a spiritual talk. This probably isn't. So I went around and I picked him up and I brushed him off, put him back in his car, and started to make amends immediately. You know, I'm a member of a 12-step group, and what we do, his eyes got this big. And I'm sitting there in the middle of the freeway going, I'm 15 years sober. What's wrong with this picture? Shortly after that, I was at work. I had just gotten this new job. And I was running this agency, and a guy came in. His girlfriend had left a deposit on a piece of merchandise she wanted to purchase, and I guess the previous management there, they had some difficulties with them. And she called me up and said, I want my deposit back. And I looked at what she ordered, and I thought, man, that's an excellent piece of merchandise. I'd love to have it back in inventory. So I said, sure, come on. I'll give you, I'm sorry about whatever happened before. We'll give you a check. And she came in with her boyfriend, who was muscle-bound. And I found out later he was a stuntman and a lion tamer. They hadn't run into this lion before. And he started getting real smart with me. And he had nothing to do with the deal. She seemed to be pleasant. I had her sign that she had gotten the check, and I said, thank you very much. I'm sorry it didn't work out. And he said to me, what are you, some kind of, and called me about every foul name he could. And I had a coffee cup in my hand, and I crushed it. And I went for him. And I'm running down Burbank Boulevard, full steam, and this kid could run, man. This guy could run, because I couldn't catch him. And here comes my boss driving by this way. Oops. And I stopped, and I caught my breath, and I went back to work, and I went in. And those people where I'd been for 3 months that loved and respected me and trusted me could not even look me in the eye. They had saw a rage in me that just terrified them. And that's the day I decided the book is correct. I cannot afford anger and resentment, justified or unjustified. I can't. Now those are the obvious ones. The other ones I got to ask is how to come out with my loved ones, with my children. How to come out with my co-workers. How to come out with the people I sponsor. Because it was coming out some way. Because until it's surrendered, it doesn't go away. And I found out for me that surrendering it indeed goes away. That I don't have to control it. I don't have to work on it. I don't have to process it. I have to do what it says in the book. God save me from being angry. And leave it there. And leave it there. How well does that work? It got to the point in my life where you aren't going to believe this because I find it hard to believe. I could not remember the names of the guys who killed my father. Could not remember their names. Now that's a lifetime of guaranteed resentment and anger. Nobody'd be mad at me for that. Trouble is, it was killing me. And I really got to the point of where I could not remember. Somebody asked me, and I couldn't recall one name. That's the kind of healing that's available here. Not there, not in the future, not tomorrow, but right now. If you're willing to put it down And here they say, put it on paper, look for it really is. And what I missed in my inventories, I think, was the depth of my anger. The depth of my anger. I really didn't know. If you'd asked me, I thought I was doing fine. I thought, I'd do a little gossip every now and then, barbed with hostility. It's called character assassination. I was just helping you so you wouldn't get involved. So I had to put that stuff in my inventory. And I had to put that down, and I really had to be willing to admit to God, to myself, and to another human being the exact nature of my wrongs. Now it's funny because fifth steps are taken all over this country, and there's directions on how to listen to a fifth step right in the 12 and 12, and most people don't get it. When I was going into seminary, I was there and I was trying to behave myself. I was not trying to, even though I live Alcoholics Anonymous and everything I do, I was just trying to be one of the group. And we're sitting there and they brought in a priest to talk to us about a fifth step. And I'm being a good little pastor. I'm just sitting there. And he says, when you listen to a fourth step, you never say anything. You just let them, leave their burden with you. But you never interfere. And I went. He said, yes. I said, where'd you get that information? He said, I've been sober 18 years. I said, yeah, I've been sober 25. Where'd you get that information? Well, I learned that in AA. And I said, oh, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. And he said, well, I think I did. And I said, well, you might want to read the 12 and 12. Because in the 12 and 12, it says that we counsel, direct, and advise. Counsel, direct, and advise. When we listen to a four-step. You know why that was so personal to me? First fourth step I ever did was with Father Dan. He's a wonderful guy and takes fifth steps with hundreds of guys, maybe thousands, because he's been doing it 30 years I've known him, 35 years I've known him. But I sat there and I took that fifth step, and Father Dan would pat his Bible and he'd listen. And I'd left there, and the next day I was creating a new fourth step, and I thought, what's that about? God, I just did that, and here I am doing the same crap. I didn't get any counsel, direction, or advice. When I got my sponsor, he said, you're going to take your inventory with me. He said, and if you don't trust me enough to do your inventory, then you need to get another sponsor, because we're talking about your life. And come on in. And he said, you're going to do it with me. Well, I thought, well, what if you get drunk? And he said, well, what if a priest gets drunk? Oh, okay. And so I took my inventory with him, and I'll tell you what I found. That when the old habits would start appearing, he could bring them up to me. Ed, how many hours did you work last week? 40? How many did you put on your time card? Well, 43. Didn't we talk about that in your inventory, Ed? The minute you start stealing a little bit, doesn't go into every area of your life. Oh, yeah, thanks. See, that's what I needed. I needed to be counseled, directed, and advised, and be with somebody who could hold me accountable. Now, I know that's not fashionable for a lot of people. They just don't want to be held accountable. I needed to be, because I was my own worst enemy, even when I thought I was doing great. I needed someone to hold me accountable and give me a new perspective. And in sponsorship, what I did is supplement my judgment, their judgment for mine, because my best judgment kept me sick for years. Even in AA. If you remember, I was 2.5 years sober before I got a sponsor. And I'd been through hell. With my father being murdered and all that. And I was stark raving sober. I was stark raving sober. And that's the time when I really had those suicidal depressions where I just wanted it to end. I couldn't take the pain of living anymore. So when I share with you about these steps and call them life and death, that's what they were to me. Drinking never occurred to me, but hitting a bridge abutment, turning on the gas, just going to sleep, no dramatics, that sounded attractive. And through doing a fourth and fifth, I got to take that option off the table too. But if I'd never told anybody about it, it'd still be on the table. 4 and 5 are cleansing. That's where we get in there and we scrub our insides out. I call it scraping of the soul. And man, you want it good. And if there's any secrets you kept, go back and tell them. Because we are indeed as sick as our secrets. And it's always funny to me when people say, oh, I don't want to do a 4th and 5th. I've been so bad. I said, yeah, you're probably one of the worst. And at first I go, yeah, probably. I said, no, that's a joke. That's a joke. There are no original sins. They've all been done before. Probably a lot better than we did them, and a lot more times. And part of what I had to put on my inventory is my hate for me. I hated every breath I took. I felt dirty where soap don't get. And I didn't like me at all. And those of you who liked me, I thought were just misunderstanding who I really was. What I learned through that inventory is I am a collector of ones, and I knew every negative thing there was about me. And that was up front in my mind. And step 4, step 5, 6, and 7 is where I started eliminating the ones in my life. For those of you who weren't here last night, the ones are simply, the analogy I come up with is I could walk into a room of 300 people, 299 could turn around to me and say, Ed, you're the greatest. And one could go, jerk. And I'd remember the one. Forget all the wonderfulness that was in that room. I'd remember the loser. And that'd be my life. Well, the inventory is the time where I started losing that bag of ones. And it helped me breathe unhindered. You ever noticed alcoholics and people who love alcoholics are very shallow breathers? Seriously, did you ever notice that? We had a wonderful meditation this morning where we're doing some breathing exercises. And I stumbled onto that. God showed me that through a friend of mine, Clint H. He was talking, and he was telling his story one day, and he just said it this quick, kind of like a throwaway line. He said, and when my mother died when I was 9 years old, I stopped breathing deeply. I went, wow. When I stopped breathing deeply? I don't ever remember breathing deeply. It was very shallow. I was real easy to upset. And I could explode, snap like that. And I started breathing deeply. Well, when you got a bag full of ones, you breathe shallow because it's a heavy load. And the less the load, the more you can breathe. It's kind of like being congested. You got a bad cold, you can't take a deep breath, and the more it heals, the better you can breathe in. So I would highly recommend to you, whether you've been here a day or you've been here 40 years, if you're not practicing deep breathing, number one, it is the fuel that makes your body operate. What keeps you on earth. Breathe deeply every chance you get. Now, if you're anxiety prone, do it slowly, please, or you'll have an anxiety attack, okay? But breathing deeply, slowly and deeply, fuels our bodies, our hearts, our minds, and yes, indeed, our emotions. I realized my ones created my chemical imbalances. My ones, the key word is chemical imbalance. Well, you know what? I can create a chemical imbalance with you at any given moment. You ever been startled? Somebody run up behind you or just come up and you're startled? What happens to your body? Chemical imbalance. I can give you a visual image. I do it a lot of times, and I just have you close your eyes and I have you envision a giant green 7-foot dill pickle. The sourest dill pickle you could ever imagine. And I have you walk up and I have you take a great big bite out of that sour green dill pickle, and the juice is just running down your face. And those who are not on medication, I'm not trying to be smart, it's true, because that's what medication's for, is to mask. Start salivating and tasting it, and they're licking their lips, and I say, by my input, I just created a chemical imbalance in you. Just by telling you a little story. Imagine the stories we tell us day and night. Imagine if it's all a negative input. Imagine if it's all negative energy. Imagine if it's all self-hate and it's self-doubt. Of course we're going to be chemically imbalanced. Now imagine if you start empty this out with 4 and 5, make some adjustments in 6 and 7, and start putting good in. The imbalance changes. I promise you. I haven't had a depression in 25 years. And they told me when I got sober I could never live without some sort of medication. And for the way I was at that particular time, they were absolutely right. Because of all I knew to learn, I created it. Selfishness, self-centeredness is the root of all of my troubles. And through 4 and 5, I learned a way to get out of that negative imaging because I didn't need it anymore. And you taught me a way to put in some positive things, like helping other people and watching their life change. And wonderful things happen. So 4 and 5 are powerful, and when I do 4 and 5, I really take a minute before I'm done and I ask, is that it? Is that all there is? Am I stealing anything at work? Paper clips, stuff I've just rationalized away, time, packing the time card. Am I being emotionally dishonest with my loved one? Oh, let's not bring up porno on the internet. My God, that's an outside issue. No, it's a compulsive issue. And that's what we're talking about. Whatever area of your life you're not working this program, it's going to cost you everything you ever loved, eventually. Where am I being wrong? What am I doing wrong? Am I thinking ill of people way too often? And for me, any time is way too often. I challenge you the minute you think. I remember, I might have shared this with you last night, I'm not sure, but Chuck C., when I talked, I didn't know how to pray at all, and Chuck was just amazing. And I went up to Chuck one time and I said, Chuck, how do you pray? And he said, Ed, your every thought's a prayer. And I did a little inventory about what I was thinking and went, uh-oh. It was not good news that every thought was a prayer to me. It was just not good news at all. And then I asked myself a simple question. Well, if it's crap, why am I thinking it? Why don't I replace it with a good thought? And really try to make my every thought a prayer. That's been my goal from that day to this. I'm better at it than I've ever been in my life. I'm certainly nowhere close to having it mastered. But I'm telling you what, most of my life, I would say 85% to 90% of my day is praying unceasingly. Because my every thought is a prayer. I want God to approve of everything that goes through this little mind. And if He doesn't, I'm trashing it. There's a Brother Lawrence, was a monk a number of years ago. And Brother Lawrence was just an amazing guy. Well, let me tell you the story. I love this story. I love how God talks to me in life. I travel a lot. I travel about every weekend, and I've got a terrible habit. I take the book that I'm reading that's really feeding me spiritually, and I take it with me on the plane, and I put it in the back of the seat in front of me, and I forget it every time. So when I leave the plane and realize I got to catch the other one, I can't go back, I say a little prayer that book be a blessing to whoever finds it. And they get the same blessing or more than what I've been getting out of it. Last January, New Year's, it was January 1st. I was flying back from Shreveport, and I thought, man, I got nothing to read. I said, God, I need a little book. So I looked in the back, and I pulled out a book. And it was called Living in the Presence of God. And it was sayings of a guy named Brother Lawrence. It's this monk I'm talking to you about. And for the last 15 years, I've really tried to look at ways to pray, effective ways to pray. And man, we can get wordy and we can do all this. And Brother Lawrence in that little book says, I do the formal prayers they ask as a monk, but I have no other formal prayers. He said, I guess my prayer would be each day I say, God, let me do nothing that offends you. I thought, God, how simple. How simple. And that's my prayer today. And I went home and I had just moved into this house. And on the kitchen table was a tape of Chuck C. I thought, that's odd. I haven't had that tape out for years. I've got every talk he's ever given. I haven't had that tape out for years. And so on my kitchen table, I went out in the car and I put the tape in, and he's talking about Brother Lawrence. I'd never heard him talk about Brother Lawrence before. That's the way my God works in my life. And it's simply, I pray that I do nothing that offends you today. Boy, that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? I pray that I do nothing that offends you, and I added today, because it is a day at a time. But with 4 and 5 in that inventory, I had to put my sense of anger at God. Why would you rip people out of my life? Why would you give people cancer? Why would you do all this crap? Why do you let children starve in Africa? And I learned that God isn't letting people starve in Africa. We are. He's given us more than enough. We're too busy upping our cell phone minutes and getting that flat screen TV. Thank you very much. Don't blame God anymore. He weeps at our selfishness. And I blamed him for years. You know, I found that out at my father's funeral. I had a terrible struggle with what was God's will and what wasn't. And the priest said, you know, a lot of people would say Clifford's death is God's will. He said, I don't believe that for a minute. He said, I believe God created human beings and gave us all a free will. Some of those human beings chose to do this act. Bless you. And now it's God's will. It was like the weight of the world fell off my shoulders. I came to believe from that day to this, if it isn't good, it isn't God. Period. And I can back it up in that other book. But isn't that amazing? You know, if it isn't good, it isn't God. I had to put all that stuff in that inventory so I could find out, if I don't get rid of the old information, there's no room for new information. And God, I wanted to be whole. I could see people being functioning parts of this world. And I just looked at them in awe, and I thought, God, that's what I want. But I had to put down that I called God a lot of names. That I hunted his people down and harmed them in every way I knew how to do. But I also come to believe and come to read that he forgives ignorance and unbelief. Boy, thank you. And he also says, what better than to save one of the worst sinners of them all? What better example to those around me? So I didn't have to hate me anymore. I didn't have to think I was the worst thing that ever walked on this earth. That I was morally corrupt. You know. Years ago, I shared this story with Doug the other day. Years ago, I used to have a lot of judgments about a lot of people, like we still do. I'm sure there's still some there. I'm trying to get rid of them the best I can when they come up. But there was I have permission to tell this story, but there was a wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams named Lance Rensel. Lance was a wide receiver, making big money, married to Joey Heatherton, who was a gorgeous blonde. She was just beautiful, an actress. And Lance got arrested for exposing himself to little girls on the street corner. And man, there was big trouble. Bad press, almost lost everything. He said, I'm going into treatment, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Well, 6 months later, guess what? He did it again. And he lost his career, he lost his wife, he lost everything. And part of his sentence was to do community service. So I went down to Clancy's office one day, and there's Lance in there doing community service. And I walk in, and Clancy says, this is a guy, sponsor Ed, he's a recovering alcoholic. And Lance said, oh, hi, how are you? And I said, fine, good to see you. And Clancy stepped out of the office for a minute, and Lance turned to me and said, you know, I have a problem exposing myself to children. And I said, I don't really know a lot about that. He said, oh, I thought you said you were alcoholic. And I said, yeah. He said, yeah, you know nothing about having a compulsion that if you do it, it'll cost you everything you've ever loved. And you do it anyway. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? And I made amends right there. How many thought of our addiction and compulsive being weak-willed? Why don't you get a life? Why don't you get some help? What's wrong with you? Same thing that's wrong with me. The exact same thing that's wrong with me. And what a healing moment. I have friends who were sexual offenders for a long time, and they don't offend one day at a time, and haven't for some time, because their recovery is one day at a time. And it's powerful. all the hate I had for other people, I had to put in that inventory. Had to put it in there because if I didn't, bad things were going to happen. And I probably, thank you. And I bet if I didn't put them in the inventory, bad things were going to happen. And the worst thing is that I would have kept living the way I was living. See, dying didn't scare me. It was a wish. Living terrified me. Sober. Because I'd been around and I'd been marching in the footsteps, I thought, of everybody else. Yet there was a madness that was in me. And I also need to tell you that doing 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8, the way the madness is gone from me anymore. And it hasn't returned. I know it can return if I stop doing the very things I'm sharing with you today. Putting it first and foremost in my life, you know. So getting somebody who knows how to do a 5th step is very important. I've had people fly in around the country, just do a 5th step and go back home. And that's cool too, because in their area they don't do it with sponsors. And I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. I'm saying that was the most effective way for me. And I tell them when we sat down, I said, about halfway through this, you're going to be mad as hell at me. Because I'm going to step right on your toes. I've got to change the way you think about some things or you're going to die. And they said, I would never get mad. At the end, there's a tremendous healing that takes place. Because one of the things that happened in my 4th and 5th is things that I was absolutely convinced of were killing me. And I had to look at them differently. Number 1, you were all against me. No, you were against my actions. Big difference. There was a lot of people that were for me, just couldn't put up with my behavior. Big difference. I needed to hear that truth. And I heard that in inventory. A lot of people didn't like me because I was very unlikable. Needed to hear that too. It wasn't unfortunate. It wasn't I was misunderstood. It's that I was really understood. They knew what kind of jerk they were dealing with and didn't like it. Through that inventory, I have given the world complete permission not to like me at all, and it doesn't chase my boat anymore. I mean it. If you didn't like me, it'd kill me. It'd kill me. Why? Doesn't matter why. I give you the right not to like me because you know what? There's some people that just rub me the wrong way. And I demand that right, so I got to give you that right. And since I've given you that right, it no longer bothers me anymore. My sponsor said to me one time, Ed, if you look good to jerks, that should tell you something. I'd never heard that before. I like that. And I still do. There are a lot of people, I don't want them to like what I have to say. Because in order for them to like it, I'd have to be of like mind. And I've watched them die for years. And I watched me die for years until I found out the answer's still the answer. It's the application that was missing. The answer's still the answer. It's just the application that was missing. How are we doing on time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? I still got to do step 6. Well, then I did step 6. Thank you very much. Step 6 is powerful. I always get them mixed up. I'm going to read it here. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. This little paragraph, this little first paragraph says, this is the step that separates the men from the boys or the women from the girls or the adults from the children, however you want to look at it. And boy, it's true. It's absolutely true in my case because they're talking about the things that caused my chemical imbalance. They talk about false pride or pride. I still hear that in meetings. I hear people in meetings say, my meeting's the best meeting in the world. Really? How long did it take you to get to all those meetings to make that decision? It's just ego and pride. It's just ego and pride. Oh, my group's the best group. I'm the one that knows the only way to... Sorry. That's step 6. Doesn't need to be here. This isn't a competition. This is an inclusive ride. Come along, you know. And greed, my God, greed. What do you do with that? You stop being greedy. How do you do that? You start giving and stop keeping track of what you're giving. When I gave you anything, I would usually remind you of it from time to time. And when I was in need, wonder just where the hell you were at, not helping me. And I started giving, and I don't keep track, and I haven't had that thought in ages. You owe me nothing. I'm in need of nothing except what I create in my own mind through my own energy. I'm in need of nothing unless I want to be. Procrastination. Let's talk about that next hour. No. But isn't it true? Isn't it true? Procrastination. Let's put off talking about that till later. What is it in your life that you know if you did would make you feel better that you haven't done? For me, and this is going to sound corny, being a macho man, but if my home gets out of order, now I need to tell you I'm a reformed pig. Well, no, I'm not saying that in a mean way. I'm saying that in a life experience way. Mom had 7 kids. She was gone all day. Our house was a pigsty. And I thought that's the way you lived. And then I learned, no, you don't have to live that way. And I'm not a perfectionist where I have to have everything in order. Like when I came in, my water was lined up in a perfect triangle, Joanne. But I don't judge, I just merely report. But now, if my house, I was given a new house. I'll tell you this story. In December, well, we need 2 stories with that. About 4 years ago, I was with the Methodist Church, and I absolutely loved it. It was a time in my life when everything was just going absolutely exquisite. And 2 things happened. I'll just tell you about one of them. The church came to me, and at that time I spoke in AA once a month. When I went into the ministry at 23 years sober, I said I would be happy to do your ministry, and I'll go get that 230 hours of college credit and that graduate. I'll do all that. But I need to be able to go talk in AA at least once a month out of gratitude for what they give me, because if it wasn't for them, you wouldn't have me the other 3 to 4 Sundays a month. And that was fine for 8 years. Then we got in a new bishop. And the new bishop said, why should you have a Sunday a month off? None of my other pastors do. Make a choice. You can either be a pastor at the United Methodist Church, or you can go talk to your AA friends. And it was no-brainer in one, but there was a problem. I realized that the 299s are a lot of wonderful people. In my church, out of the 1,200, there were 3 groups of 299. And I absolutely loved them. And my heart was broken. But I'm here, so it's obvious the choice I made. And as a result of that, I started my own church, and it's been a struggle. I realized why people get involved with denomination. It's called a vein of money that runs through and keeps you going. When you're struggling to thank God for it, I just don't have that. And I spent everything I had trying to keep this little church going. I had to file bankruptcy. And I'm not complaining about that. It was my choice. Whether it be right or wrong, let God be the judge. It was what I felt I needed to do at the time. And then last December, I'm sitting there, and I'd been holding on to this house I bought in 92, and I don't know about the utility bills up here, but this is an old house built in the 1800s. And my utility bills for November and December were $900. And the payment was $800 a month. So when you're not working, puts a little crimp, or you're working every day, but you're just not getting a check in. Makes it tough. So I decided, I said, God, maybe I made a mistake here holding on to this house. I'm sure sorry. And I said, I'll give it to you, and you do whatever you want. I met with the realtor, and I owed exactly what was worth on it, so they just cashed me out. And I didn't know where I was going, but I knew it was going to be all right. I'd started a job at Tyson's as a part-time chaplain where I'm at today. I've been there just about a year. And this nurse walked by me one day named Mary, and Mary said, Ed, are you looking for a house? And I said, oh, yeah, yeah. She said, well, we have one for sale out in the country. She said, it's just wonderful. And I said, how much is it? And she told me, and I went, phew. And I said, I had to file bankruptcy a couple of years back, and cash-wise, I'm just not making it. And thank God I got this job. Now I can at least eat. That's good. And but I can't do that. And she said, oh, okay. And about 2 weeks later, she called me up and said, Ed, why don't you come look at the house? Because it's winter. Real estate doesn't move down there in the winter months. Really, it's March. It picks up. Says we'll rent it to you for enough for you to get by, and that way the house isn't abandoned, and you'll be. Oh, I thought good. And I went and looked at it. And you may have had this, but I have never had a sense of home before. And the minute I walked in the door, I was like, I'm home. And I just backed up and said, whoa, can't go there. Temporary situation, one day at a time, and I'm real grateful for it. About a week later, Mary comes to me and her husband Ray and said, Ed, we'd help you if we could, but we really feel God wants you to have this house, so we're going to pray for a financial blessing. And when someone else initiates it, I feel comfortable joining them in prayer. It's not my will, it's theirs. So I started saying some prayers for that. About 2 weeks later, I'm doing a retreat that I do 3-4 times a year down in my home area, and there's a gal there that's been there for 12 years, coming for 12 years, and she said, Ed, where are you living? And I told her about the little place. She said, why don't you buy it? And I said, well, I just don't have the wherewithal to do that. And she said, well, I'm in real estate and I speculate. You mind if I come and look at it? I said, no, because they were nice people and they needed to move this house because they had taken a loan out against, put it on this one, they got to sell this one and that, and I really wanted them to be happy and stay in their new home. And so she came over, walked through the house. That was Sunday. On Tuesday night, she called me and she said, Ed, I just wanted you to know I bought the house. And I said, well, good. Congratulations. It's a great little house, and I know you'll like it. She said, no, it's for you. And I said, well, no, I can't afford that. She said, Ed, what kind of payment can you afford? And I said, nowhere near what you need. I just can't. She said, Ed, that isn't what I asked you. What kind of payment can you afford? And I said, and I told her, and she said, okay, it's your house. We'll do a land contract, and that's your payment. And I've been living there ever since. Now, there would have been a time before a good 4, 5, and 6 where I would have never believed a story like that. Now I'm living them. Is it because I'm special? Because I'm special? It's because what we've been given here is the answer to everything we've been looking for. What you came here looking for, you're looking with. See you in a little while.
Thank you for listening to Sober Sunrise. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a thumbs up as it will help share the message. Until next time, have a great day.